The story begins with the fact that in this world there are two types of people. One of them is winners, and the second is mainly losers. Xiaoluo classifies himself precisely to the second type, so I decided to write a statement for dismissal from work. Having worked at one company for almost 3 years, he quit and entered the disease in the reason for his decision. Its director was the girl he had previously met. She took their divorce as a real reason for dismissal. But the guy believed that life in this social world made him understand that there is only one step between success and failure. And in the director's office, he replied that she was wrong, since he had his own reasons. And since there were no problems with the statement written by him, Xiaoluo hoped that he would no longer see the former. Not knowing what to add more, the guy turned around and went to the exit. But the girl suddenly apologized. But instead of mutual words of farewell, she heard that Xiao already spent 4 years of her life on her. So she did not want to continue this time. The girl could not stand it and said that despite her feelings, she did not want to get married and live with him in one close rented apartment. He does not want to live his whole life as an ordinary housekeeper. It was all completely different that Zhao Manchichi would like, so I had to make sacrifices. But Xiaoluo already understood everything very well, so he answered the girl that she could not tell him, since he respects her choice. Menzi was still sure that it was their relationship that made the guy quit, because of which he could now become a loser for his life. The man had nothing to say, since he had long been in despair and not a single positive thought appeared in his head. He was sure that success and failure was just an assessment that gives a person for others. However, from that moment he decided that he would not allow anyone to evaluate him without permission. Having at least some motivation and plans for the future, he confidently went for personal things and said goodbye to his colleagues. Suddenly in the corridor, he met Hua Hanfei, who was the heir to Huahai groups and had a rather calm life. The guy went to Xiao, with whom he was personally familiar, and calling his name, he kindly greeted. He held out his hand to Luo and thanked him for taking care of Cixi for so long. Gossip began to spread behind the guys that Mr. Hua and Zhao Manchichi together, so this was exactly what was perceived as the reason for the dismissal of the worker. Xiaoluo had no desire to linger with this person for a long time, so answering that he had busy hands, he went on. Then Hanfei decided that he wanted to make the last day of Xiao as painful as possible. He began to tell the ugly details of his personal life with Mansitsi, which he seemed to use, like he tried to spend time with her in different ways, and something surprised him the most. As it turned out, the girl had nothing for 4 years of relations with Xiao, which seemed strange to Hanfei. He began to make fun of the young man and joke that he needs to see a doctor and follow his health. Their conversation took place among the office, so other workers also heard everything and began to discuss the herd among themselves. Xiu did not give out any vivid emotions and only asked if Hanfei was accidentally ill if he spreads the details of his personal life. The guy was angry due to the fact that after telling all the dirty things, he was not able to bring to emotions or to cause pain to the former girlfriend. He rushed to Luo and called him garbage, because no one before allowed himself to humiliate him, calling him mentally ill. Xiao had no desire to continue this conversation and simply threw a fool away from himself in order to be able to go further. Hanfei came with security, so he ordered the men to beat the guy to take revenge. One of the guards rushed to fulfill the order and swinging in the Xiao was ready to beat him to death. But Luo was not as simple loser as it seemed at first sight. Therefore, he easily repulsed the attackers. After the blow received from the leg, the bald strong man had already wiped the floor with his body. Hanfei began to worry and ordered the second guard so that he would not observe how he was mocking his colleague, but rushed forward into a fight. Luo was not afraid of the healthy man and had the strength to defend himself further, so he immediately held the striker's hand. And Luo managed to deal with a man in one movement, but he turned out to be stronger than his partner. This time, Xiao had to make efforts to not only stop the guard, but also strike as an answer. The guy was confident in his own abilities, and in order to anger the guy even more, asked whether he was really capable of. Then the young man applied his crown blow and waved his head with his foot right into the man. Having dealt with 2 guards, Luo was pleased with himself for the first time in a long time, because at least something was quite good in something. Hanfei began to worry about the fact that now he is absolutely without protection. Therefore, it only remained to indicate his status, which he did. He told the guy that if he wants to hit him, then he may no longer dream of a free and calm life in Jiangchen. But Xiaoluo got in earnest. So preparing his fists for battle, asked for what a daring man told him. After that, he scored Hanfei into a corner like a frightened puppy, and he said if someone was touching him, then he and his father will take revenge. But the young man was still on threats with the status, since he decided to turn this matter differently. Then, with all his strength, Hanfei hit his face and said that he would educate him instead of his father. And one blow was not done, so after the final phrase, he again put the physical pain to the air to a large company. Hanfei, exhausted, hit the office and could not even move. Information about the fight was immediately reported to the leadership, and Zhao Mansikan quickly appeared at the scene to reassure her gentleman. Xiaolo was surprised at her appearance and could not master her emotions, as the ex-girlfriend showed him what to do. The girl was terribly angry with the guy and tried to find out why Xiao began a fight and behaved so aggressively. Not receiving an answer, she ran to Mr. Hua and was concerned about his condition. Xiao understood the director like no other, because he had been in a relationship with her for 4 years and knew what true love was. Therefore, he turned to the girl and asked if she was really confident in the reciprocity of her feelings with a rich air. Zhao did not answer because she was more worried about her new chosen one. Zhao decided not to linger in this place for a long time and said that Hua only uses it to embody his desires. He did not add anything else, thereby leaving an unfinished conversation between him and the former. The young man immediately returned to the box with some things that he kept at work and took it. After that, he went as soon as possible to the exit, since this place oppressed it, and immediately turned to the system. She said that only 22 people had strong feelings. Holding was 215 points, and the moment the owner could exchange skills in foreign languages. Of course, the exchange was successful, and the king became a new skill, with a greedy physique. Moreover, the ability in foreign skills. On that day, a dialogue window appeared in front of the young man, and he already thought that hallucinations began against the background of stress. But this was not so. The system explained that it arrived from parallel Earth and decided to integrate with the user, since he had enough energy. The censor of its existence was to turn the user into a genius in order to change his fate, and according to her analysis, the user was a mediocre person, so for now, he had to continue to earn points and exchange them for awards. Xiu did not understand how the system could change his fate. Is it possible to give a couple of $100 billion, or make a general? But she explained that she could only change the user's stature and tighten his knowledge and experience. Therefore, he must rely on himself. Suddenly, Luo came a message from his mother that his father was very ill and they needed money. The guy did not know what to answer, since he himself was in a difficult situation. But he also could not leave his family to Biling, so he promised that he would send the right amount of funds within a few days. Now the time has come to come up with how to find funds and who could take them in debt. He understood that a man without money is not a full-fledged man who could not even provide himself. Then Luo called a friend who found out through other acquaintances that the guy had quit and now has no place of work. Zhao had no time and desire to discuss his past. He was more interested in the question of whether a friend knew the place where it would be possible to quickly earn extra money. Suddenly, Luo was stopped by a girl on the street, which tried to attract at least someone's attention. She was still very small, but she had no family and lived on the street. Therefore, she asked passers-by whether someone could give her a little money. She needed at least a couple of dollars to buy and somehow exist further. Xiu had a similar situation, but at least he had a house. But being busy, he answered the girl that he had no money at all. Then she, with tears in her eyes, apologized for being detained by the guy. Suddenly, he took out several small bills from his pocket and put it on a plate. It was all in his pocket, but a little girl was more than enough. She immediately began to thank and call Xiao a good person who would not leave in trouble. After which the little one turned around and there was something strange in her walking. Her steps were uncertain and careful, as if something had happened to her foot. Xiaolo drew attention to this and realized that the beggar of cripple, which could not walk normally. Suddenly, a notification of a new temporary task came to his new system, which will help to earn points. She consisted in saving a strange girl, and 300 points would be a reward for this. Xiao did not understand why exactly and from whom the stranger should save, but nevertheless distracted from a telephone conversation. Not yet knowing how he should carry out the task, Luo nevertheless agreed to him. Without a specific action plan, Xiaolo decided to first observe a little after the stranger and followed her. Finally, having the opportunity to finish with a friend, he turned to that and said that he could continue. But the man said that he did not work on the customer service line, so he should not wait for the continuation of the conversation. But quickly having calmed down, he continued that he knew one runner who wanted to buy local goods, taking a loan and transporting them to another place for sale. However, the formalities were not observed and the loan was not agreed. Therefore, if Muo has 130,000 yuan, he will be able to earn about 20,000 in 20 days. Luo got angry and said that if he had that kind of money, he would not ask his friend how to work quickly. And the comrade said that he also has a friend who wants to open a beauty salon, and she needs about 50,000 yuan to buy equipment. During the year, one could earn 60,000 yuan on this and become a co-owner of the salon. Xiaoluo continued to listen to everything, and at the same time watched the stranger who noticed surveillance. Then the guy hid behind one of the houses and asked his friend to wait a bit on the line. He got angry and said that he was not a taxi driver who would wait all the time and spend his time on empty chatter. He did not understand what a strange situation was happening to Xiao and had no desire to interfere in his problems. Meanwhile, Luo heard how someone in a low voice threatens a person. Then he looked behind the house and saw one big man took the money from a little girl and took a knife. Threatened her? He demanded more money from her, because otherwise he would deprive the girl of her broken leg, and she will forever be crippled. Xiaoluo himself was frightened and did not know how to act correctly, so as not to harm the Pole. And that fat man holding a cigarette in his teeth asked the girl if she really sincerely begging him for mercy. He wanted to feel power at least over someone, and thanks to this also to receive money. The little defenseless girl turned out to be an ideal victim for him, which he mocked, and this time did not restrain himself. He waved his fist in the face of Little behind the words that he was tired of listening to her nagging daily. Therefore, he set his conditions. Either she will pay him daily, or he will break her second leg. Xiaoluo watched the behavior of the criminal for some time. But when this began to cross the border, he still decided to appear. He went to the man with a confident gait and ordered him to move away from the girl and leave her alone. He still had a friend on the phone line and began to worry what was happening there. Then Luo repeated once again so that the offender moves away from the little one, or for himself it would end badly. The man laughed and, taking the knife, asked the guy if he had something against such a business. At that time, Xiao managed to deal with 2 guards of the pompous air, so he was not afraid of some criminal from the street. He did not know how to solve quarrels with words, so he immediately rushed to the guy with his fist to cripple him. However, he underestimated the young man, who at first glance seemed quite weak. Xiao from the first blow fell into the head of the enemy. After that, the man flew far into the wall and could not even hold his knife. Foam began to go from his mouth, and the general physical condition was clearly worsening. Xiaoluo heard exclamations from his phone, where a friend tried to find out what kind of fight his friend fell into. He was ready to call someone to the aid or come on his own, because he understood that the situation was worsening. But Xiao was more worried about a little girl who was terribly scared and tried to calm her down. The little one could not keep her tears and began to cry a lot, because she finally felt under protection. She terribly wanted to finally get home, where mom and dad were waiting for her for a long time, who could not find her daughter. Xiao did not know how to handle children correctly, so he himself was a little scared of such a reaction, but continued to calm her. He said that he would take the girl to a policeman who would deal with this situation and take a little home. And finally, she was able to calm down and was not even afraid to go to the police, because after the experience, it was the smallest evil. Suddenly, Xiaoluo remembered a friend who continued to wait for an answer. He took the phone and said that there is not even 50,000 yuan yet, so this option is not suitable. Then he went to the police department and could not speak further, as he held a little girl in his arms, and behind him all the time was watched by a stranger who concluded that Luo was quite a good guy. The young man quickly managed to deal with the problem of a little girl, so by being tired after a few fights per day, he immediately went home to rest. The next morning, he woke up from a knock on the door, which was strange since someone rarely came to visit Xiao, and so early. Behind the door stood Chu Yunxun with several guards who wanted to ask Xiaoluo for help. The young man at first did not open the door and realized that he had already heard this name somewhere. Then he asked, was he really the richest man Jiang'an? And was right. The guy opened the door and saw that the man looks the same as on the TV. However, there was a question why he came from to him. Xiao was a little scared, but invited this guest to the apartment and immediately put a cup of water. He almost from the threshold told Yunxun that he himself was an ordinary poor man, so he did not understand why a person of the level of a venerable master was looking for him. As it turned out, last day the man saw how Xiao helped the girl and his skills were pretty good. Xiaoluo was frightened. Did Yunxun really saw his system and was able to reveal his secret? The system felt the thoughts of the owner and said that ordinary users could not see it. As it turned out, Mr. Su had a competitor who recently made friends with gangsters, so he was afraid that his daughter might be in danger. Therefore, he needed a guy who, under the guise of a student, could protect her from the shadows. However, Xiaoluo did not believe that he could approach the role of a personal defender and also pretend to be a student. Then the venerable gentleman decided that a large amount of money could help and said that he would pay 1,000,000 wen. The young man could not recover from the figure he heard, as the man called the amount of 2,000,000. Without unnecessary thought, Xiao of course agreed to such a job, but did not know all the details. For the sake of such money, the guy was ready for a lot, especially since he had to help his father recover as soon as possible. Therefore, at first he needed to get into the class of full girls to get to know the students closer. In that group, there really were only girls who were equally dressed in school uniforms. All of them spent quite boring time and were a little tired of studying. And now a new fun has appeared for them. Students immediately drew attention to Xiaoluo, who managed to attract the attention of each class. The girls felt an incredible temperament from the guy and almost at first glance fell in love with him. They considered him incredibly beautiful and immediately asked the question of whether the Xiao was a girl. Each of them wanted to get the attention of a beautiful man who, moreover, looked rather proud and was smart. But among the whole class there was one student who did not think, because she perceived the new student for an ordinary leather bag. The teacher was tired of reassuring the students and ordered them to be more likely to sit in place. One of the students tried to behave with restraint, but her eyes were betrayed by all her thoughts. Xiaoluo felt like in a wolf den, where the energy of all those present beat over the edge. Suddenly he thought why there were only girls and not a single guy in the class. One of the students, the one that did not respond to the new class member, decided to mock a new student and held out her leg to stumble. Xiaoluo could not hold on his feet and put his hand forward, flew right on the same student. Unable to manage the situation, he accidentally touched her body and immediately thought that he had a beautiful figure. Without even controlling himself, he voiced it out loud, after which he became scary and he began to apologize to the stranger. Other girls in class heard the phrase of Xiao and even a sense of jealousy woke up in them. Meanwhile, the guy wanted to fall under the ground, so as not to feel that shame on himself. Therefore, in order to get distracted, he went to the farthest desk and sat down at her alone. Already in the second pair in a row, Xiaoluo incredibly wanted to sleep and every minute of training seemed boring for him. His eyes began to gradually close and soon acquired the severity. Then the teacher turned to him and asked what the new student thinks regarding the question that they are discussing. Suddenly she saw that the guy dared to sleep in her lesson, and from this incredibly angry, Xiaoluo carefully opened his eyes and did not even understand that the teacher was turning to him. The same girl who set up her foot to the guy decided that right now, a good moment had come for her plan. Then she turned to the teacher and said that the student did not respect her time and knowledge at all. And Xiao realized that this is the very Chu Yue which became the goal of his assignment. He understood that the girl was constantly trying to get him. But the guy decided to apologize to the teacher and said that he arrived last night and he would need time to get used to the new place, and therefore fell asleep. As for the words of his classmate, he asked her to clarify when exactly he behaved with disrespect. All the girls in the class began to admire the behavior of the young man, because no one had previously allowed himself to argue with Chu Yue. And the girl herself began to get nervous, because she was not used to the fact that someone answered her rudeness in the same way. The teacher, meanwhile, took an apology and understood the student's situation. So she decided to conduct a lesson further. Now, she decided to invite students to make out the meaning of the phrase that money is the source of all evil. Chu Yue raised her hand to answer and, quoting Shakespeare, said that money had endless power to confuse the truth and lies. In addition, this is the main reason for the spread of stupid crimes. Money develops greed, turning a good mood into a product, forcing people to lose conscience until they even understand this. Therefore, in her opinion, money is true to the root of all evil. Such an answer was expected by Princess Yue, which is why other classmates were proud of her. Then, Xiaoluo decided to change the usual situation in the classroom and stood up to express his opinion on this issue. He did not think that money was the root of evil, at least it was impossible to discard all evil on them. Then, Yue denied that almost 20 years ago, 12 people died in Japan, and more than 5,000 were injured due to a terrorist act using gas in the subway. Ashara Junhuan, the head of the sect, who then sold his hair for 30,000 wen, was the culprit, and Wu Songui let the soldiers go through. Of course, he wanted Chen Yuanwan, not dollars. But later he became the king of Junan, and he also received Chen Yuanwan. However, the question arose why he wanted to become an emperor. Xu believed to answer the last question and asked, what was the source of evil before the money was invented? Other girls in class took it as traveling with the princess of Yue, and they themselves wanted to get his attention. And Luo added that it was greed that became a real source of evil, which bowed in the hearts of people. The bell was heard soon and the lesson was finished. But the discussion between classmates was still ongoing. But the teacher wanted to leave earlier and said that these debates were interesting, so she hoped that someone emphasized something from them. After the lesson, her friend approached Yue and invited the girl to forgive the new student, saying he did not want anything bad. But the princess did not care if he was a guard or not. She was not going to let him go so easily. Soon all other classes ended, so Xiao wanted to go home as always. But now he had a special mission. Meanwhile, Yue went home angry and making one phone call asked a friend to disgrace her new guard as cruelly as he could. She did not want to hear from Fu Jiwei about his gentleman and the like, so she told her husband that mercy for him would not wait for him then. She hated when they were going against her orders, and now she longed to show her husband how to be arrogant next to her. After the last phrase of the princess, the call broke off and on the other side of the line only the beep was heard. Jiwei was angry towards Zhao, who, according to the girl, strongly offended her. The man adored Ju and almost considered his queen, and her photos were hung around his house. Educational time began soon, and Xiao Luo, along with other classmates, came to school. Among other students, the guy looked senior, and he stood out among them, his gender. Suddenly, Yue approached him and smiled this time. She kindly invited the guy to a party, which will be in honor of his translation. Sholo thought that the girl ate the wrong tablets, because she behaved as it was not inherent in her. He understood that nothing good would come of it, so he decided to immediately refuse. But Yue did not want to hear refusals. She said to come to the gates of the school, from where they would go to the party's place. She looked at Xiao with an angry look and asked if her personal guard would come. Then he wondered if the girl really knew why he appeared in her life, or just checks. Xiao nevertheless agreed to a party and at exactly 6 o'clock was at the meeting place. But for 30 minutes, no one appeared. He began to worry that his thoughts regarding the fact that it would be a deception turned out to be true. But soon he heard the exclamations of a female voice that began to call him and ask what the guy was doing so late near the school. These women were new teachers of Xiao, who invited the student to go together. But at 7 o'clock, Princess Yue arrived, who was specially late for an hour to take revenge on a classmate. But she did not tell him the truth and made excuses that she had to choose a dress for a long time and gather. Suddenly, the girl opened her eyes and looking around, she did not see Xiao Luo. Then she called the dean's office and asked the phone number of the new student. Now the girl herself had to wait another 2 hours, and in 9 sat down by the name Luo, who said goodbye to the teachers and thanked them for the game. Princess Yue tried to restrain anger and without showing real emotions, ordered the guard to get into her car. While they were traveling in a car, Xiao all the time said that the girl made him wait for 30 minutes. Therefore, when they approached Village Wu, she asked her classmate to shut up and not continue to blame her. Soon, the personal driver parked the car in a small parking lot that was near the house, and the passengers got out. The guests were already waiting for the main person of that evening, so they were endlessly glad to see Princess Yue. But she decided to take off her attention and pointed out Xiao Luo with the words that this party was in his honor. Then the girl told Ziwei that if he suits a bad one for a new student, he will have to pay. The man understood what Yue hinted at, so he kindly agreed with her words. After the conversation, Fu went to Xiao and said that the princess praised her new classmate, who really turned out to be a good guy. Xiaoluo immediately felt that such attention and politeness to his person is not just like that. Now he himself wanted to observe how fake guests will lower themselves to the bottom with their behavior. Then, Jiawei went to other guests and met Shulan and Yin Yin on the road, after which he invited the girls to meet with the princess of Yue. Young beauties were glad to see the princess and dressed according to the level of the party. Shulan decided to quietly warn the main guest that Jiava has a very terrible dog. Like, she and her friend were so scared. And now the princess should help them lower the anger. Yu ordered Fu to bring that very terrible dog that was so scared by the little Shulan. The man gave a sign to his servant so that they brought an animal that inspired fear for many. Soon the guard brought the real fighting dog, which was on a strong iron leash. The dog at first seemed just big, but as soon as he opened his mouth and began to show his sharp teeth, those around him almost began to run away from the party. Next to Yue stood Xiao Luo, who ordered the girl to stay behind him, since the animal was dangerous and can bite someone at any moment. The girl took this as a manifestation of the guy's fear and said that this dog was simply trying to impress Terrible. She threw the guy aside and ordered him not to interfere with her, as she dared to get scared of an ordinary dog. Suddenly, the dog began to bark again and saliva flew out of his mouth, as if he had rabies. Suddenly, for everyone, the animal fell off the leash, which Fu did not dare to hold and rushed right at the princess. Nearby immediately appeared Xiao Luo, who defended the girl and was ready to withstand the dog's attack. He managed to instantly respond and hit the dog, so that for a while it stops rushing at the guests. It was inhumane in his opinion, but there was no other way out, since no one could stop the dog again. Suddenly, from Xiaoluo, the animal began to feel strange energy, which was confusing him. Then the dog himself was frightened of the evil of this, so he no longer showed his voice and sat quietly. Now he felt the energy of fear from Xiaovel, who himself led him to the party. After that, the dog rushed to his own owner, and this time, Xiao did not become an obstacle to animals. The beast greatly bit the man for his sensory organs, so he could not even stand on his own, and felt as if his soul was leaving his body. Princess Yue sat frightened and did not expect that her plan would go so bad that she would have to call an ambulance. Soon, the guests began to diverge from such a party, and some have now trained medical care. The Princess Yue was put on a chair and her two friends tried to calm the girl, offering to call her personal doctor. But the girl felt that she was in order and she needed to rest a bit. Shulan understood that the princess was still not going to let her guard close closely. Meanwhile, Xiao was able to understand that his main object of the mission had a panic attack, and he was going to help. Shu approached him and said that he was better not to approach Yue until she herself would allow it. She asked Yin Yin to look after the princess, and the guy should go to the remaining guests. Then Xiaoluo realized that Vile students have some more plans for him, and was ready to continue. Therefore, he immediately agreed to the proposal to go further to have fun and play games. Xiaoluo was immediately asked if he just wanted to go to see how experienced players play billiards. The young man agreed because he became interested in what plan of action Shulan was on and how it would end. Then the girl turned to one of the guys who played and asked to borrow him to key, to which she agreed. Then she called Xiao a handsome man and asked if he could play billiards. He replied that he once had experience, but a little. Shu looked at him with a destructive look and said that he would not be able to beat her. Then she put forward her conditions and invited Xiao to earn 1 point, after which he will be able to get 50,000 yuan. She was even ready to give her bank card to call the guy more excitement. He liked the idea of a bet, especially since now this whole party was like a duel for him, where he should win. However, the problem was that in the event of a defeat, he had nothing to pay off, so the conditions were unequal. But Shu found a way out and said that in case of loss, Xiao should leave the party and no longer appear there. He agreed to such conditions, and at the beginning of the show missed Shu to make the first move. The guests began to discuss among themselves that it was better for the student to disagree, as Sister Lan plays very well in billiards. To defeat the bet, Xiaoluo decided to turn to the system for help. He asked if there were any skills in her base that could be useful in this situation. There was an option for the exchange of 700 points for professionalism in billiards, so the young man immediately agreed. But as it turned out, the user had 695 points, so the exchange was impossible to perform due to a lack of points. Meanwhile, Shulan began the game and made the first blow to show how real professionals play. All guests were faithfully mating for the girl and were indisputably confident in her victory. After her first blow, someone even suggested that Xiao knelt before the Bogolard goddess to ask her mercy. Then the girl said that it was just a demonstration, so Xiao could start. The guy realized that now he would have to get out thanks to his own forces, so he began to break the brain over how to play correctly. The guests said that he simply surrendered and did not waste their time. And although the men do not say no, they waited for the player to recognize the defeat. Xiaoluo looked at key in his hands and could not understand what was on the thin end there. As it turned out, he did not even know how to hold the tool correctly, so he took it turned upside down. In fact, he had never played billiards before, so from the first blow his ball bounced off and began to jump on the table. The guests were already sure that he was losing, but the ball did not stop and flew on. Shulan began to laugh at the young man. They say he behaved like a real fool who does not even know the rules of the game he plays. Suddenly the ball hit the place where all the other balls lay and broke them in different directions. After that, 5 goals simultaneously flew into the holes, thereby scoring a large number of points for Xiao at the same time. The guests were surprised at what they saw, because even a pike was able to score at the same time as many goals. Suddenly, a notification came to the system that the user forced 20 people to doubt very much and received 33 points for it, and now he can exchange them for the skill. The exchange was successful and now the user received the skill of Master of Billiards, but the number of points did not exceed 28, which was not very good. Shu did not think that the guy hides his abilities so well and handed him the promised card. But now she invited him to play a regular game, for which he will also be able to get another 50,000. However, now Xiaoluo has a question. What will happen when he rolls all the balls? Xiaoluo said that when he rolls all the balls, Shu will run away from him 30 miles every time he would see him. Then the girl asked what he would choose as a punishment for himself when she loses. Xiao was confident in himself, so he decided to choose the most offensive punishment and said that he would become a shoe dog. The girl could not understand why he behaved so self-confident and defiant, and the guests considered the guy crazy. But despite the lack of support and doubts, Xiao picked up Qi and made the first blow. The first time he managed to quickly drive one of the balls into the hole. After what she saw, the dog began to worry about her position and could not sit in one place. Xiao continued to score the balls, and the girl only did that she prayed for the lesion of the young man. The guy's movements were perfect, as if reinforced for years of playing billiards. He managed to drive 2 more into the hole with 1 ball. Shu did not fall out the opportunity to take Qi, so Xiao reminded the girl so that she would not forget about their terms of the contract, after which he again took up the instrument and continued to score victorious glasses. Almost in no effort, he managed to receive the enthusiastic glances of the guests who stood with open mouths. Xiao's account was 147, and in the meantime, the results of his rival was only 0. Therefore, when all the balls ended, Xiao thanked for the game and reminded Shu to transfer another victorious amount to his card. The girl tried to hide her tears and said that the guy would still regret how he humiliated her in front of everyone. Meanwhile, a pleased young man left the villa and decided to visit Chu Yue, who came to his senses after the dog's attack. Despite the sadness of the girl, Xiaoluo greeted and told her that he wanted to go home. Therefore, he asked that she would take him. Princess Yue was not used to this attitude and abruptly undermined, because she could not restrain the aggression that overwhelmed her. Yin Yin, who was sitting all this time with her friend, tried to calm the girl. In the meantime, she took the phone and began to call Fu Zivu so that he came as soon as possible. Giving a sign to the man, the girl defended the princess and told Xiaoluo that Yue was not his personal driver, so he must return home on his own. After a few minutes, Jiahui appeared, who apologized to the princess for not being able to entertain her. But he did not come alone and decided to imagine the man who was next to him. It was Hua Hyphen, who incredibly admired the girl and asked the common acquaintance to arrange a meeting for them. Xiaoluo was shocked when he saw a man whom he had strongly beaten for the fact that he began to threaten him. And the only thing the young man was worried about is that Hyphen did not tell everything about him, because then his personality as a guard will be disclosed. The guy turned his back to the newly made guest so that he would not recognize him. Meanwhile, Hyphena led Huifen to the princess and introduced them to each other in order to introduce them closer. Then I wanted to imagine Xiao, who at first glance looked poor and inconspicuous among the rest. But suddenly the man saw that there was no guest in honor of which a party was arranged. Yin Wen began to rage, since the behavior of Xiaoluo was unpredictable, which complicated the opportunity to substitute it. But suddenly, Xiao turned out to be right behind Haifan, holding a glass bottle of wine in his hands. This time he decided to immediately protect Princess Yue and not give a chance to even communicate with her. The girls were shocked by the guy's act, so they stood as if dug and waited for Diav's actions. Xiao decided to improvise and said that the new guest is known for often pestering old grandmothers, so it is strange that he was generally allowed. The situation was gaining momentum, and Chu Wei became interested in what would happen next, so the girl watched from the side. Ziave came closer to Xiao and asked if Hyphen really was engaged in such things. But now it did not matter for a man, since Hua became his dear guest. So he could not just leave it. Therefore, the man called for guard and pointing his finger at Xiao said that he dared to touch his guest. Therefore, the best decision in his opinion began to expel the guy and make sure that he no longer returned. Luo did not want him to be touched, so he said that he planned to go, so it was superfluous to call the guard. Meanwhile, Jiawei flirted with Yin Yin and asked if the girl had lost anything at the party. As it turned out, she could not find her expensive necklace, so the guy offered to look together. After that, he ordered the guards to deceive everyone who would leave the party. Princess Yue understood that an obvious deception was happening and thought that Fu had gone too far this time. Then the guards first took up the search of Xiao and tried to take off all the clothes from him. The guy did not understand why they were trying to undress him despite the fact that he agreed to leave the party on his own. But he had enough strength to stand up for himself, so rather for the guards it was more dangerous to try to keep him. Xiaoluo quickly slipped out of the hands of pumped-up men and rushed to the attack so that they could no longer harm him. One of the guards received a brilliant blow from the foot right on the head. Shu threw another into the wall. From the side it seemed that the guy threw light feathers. After well-developed blows, The guy landed successfully and remained unharmed. He understood that Chu Yue specifically called him, and the guy directly asked if her hands were. Suddenly, he felt strange changes in the body. And as it turned out, it came a new notification of the system. It was an urgent task. Xiao had to track the mysterious shadow. A reward for this will be 300 points in case of victory. But if he loses, he will also lose 300 points. And if there are not enough glasses in the account, then the user will have one random skill. Xiaoluo understood that he was 28 points on his account, so he urgently must complete a spontaneous task. The guy immediately saw a mysterious shadow near himself and rushed after her so as not to lose a trace. The shadow was extremely fast, so if the Xiao relaxes at least for a moment, then he would immediately lose it. Suddenly, after 100 meters, the shadow turned behind the house and Luo almost lost it. Suddenly, he saw a man who was in a protective mask on his face, so it was impossible to recognize his personality. But now it was not as important as a shadow, which was very vigilant, so the task was incredibly difficult. 15 minutes later, a car stood near the villa, and there were several men in costumes near it. The same guy in the mask followed them, and Xiao noticed it. Then he thought about the fact that men near the car could be personal guards of Chu Yue. The guy began to quickly run towards the car, and his plans were unpredictable for others. Suddenly, the guards near the car heard sounds nearby, so they began to worry about the safety of this place. The stranger ran right between the men, but there was no further where to go, since there was a car nearby. But for the young man, this was not a problem, and he deftly jumped up the car without touching it. But being at a safe distance for him, the guy showed a gun to men. As it turned out, during the time when he ran past them, he managed to grab a weapon from the pockets of the guards. When the men saw the missing weapon, they rushed to catch up with the guy to pick up what belongs to them. Meanwhile, Xiaoluo continued to run after the shadow, which drove him almost throughout the city. Suddenly, he had a bell, where they reported that someone aimed at Chu Yue, so he should urgently flee to the villa of Fu Jiave. Having the opportunity to relax for at least a few seconds, Zhao decided to stretch the muscles before a possible fight. Pretty soon, the guy managed to run to the villa to exactly have time to save the girl. Meanwhile, Chu Yue enjoyed silence and could have a rest from the pool alone. She did not expect that Xiaoluo would even be a little interesting for her, so she thought about changing her attitude towards him. Suddenly, the same stranger in the mask, which was now armed, was behind the princess. The criminal closed her mouth so that the victim could not shout for help and would not interfere with him. But despite this, the girl still hoped that her father would hear quiet sounds from her and save. Soon, Xiaoluo turned out to be nearby, who put all his strength to be as soon as possible near the villa. He immediately rushed to the criminal and inflicted his first blow to him with his foot, because of which he could not resist the spot. He had to release Chu Wei to run away at least a safe distance. But Xiao's blow was too strong, and the guy is quite clever, and now the thief was broken by a hand. Then he threw away the princess and bounced, telling Luo that he had a good wrestling technique. But his speed was still large enough, despite the injured hand, so the man disappeared from sight. Xiao realized that the offender knew the exact time when Chu Yue was alone, so it seems among her surroundings there was a rat that reported everything. Meanwhile, the princess could barely resist the forelimbs and her head was dizzy. She could not clearly see her savior because her eyes gradually became harder. Everything was because of that napkin with an unknown substance that the attacker attached to the girl's nose. Suddenly, Xiaoluo heard a strange sound nearby, as if someone was going to villa again. As it turned out, these were guards who also suffered from a stranger and wanted him. Xiao ordered the men to take Chu Yue back home and would not forget to report everything to Mr. Chu. The guy told his suspicions regarding the spy surrounded by the girl. 3 hours later, everything calmed down around the villa, and the guy could go home with a calm soul. Meanwhile, Hua Hanfei has long been in his bed and saw terrible dreams after he received a strong blow to the head. His room was all in unnecessary pieces of paper and dirty, as if they had not been cleaned there for a long time. After incomprehensible dreams, the guy was able to recover and immediately reached for the cigarette. As it reassured him, thoughts about Xiaoluo did not leave his head. He could not believe that the very weak-edged young man beat him so much. It still seemed strange to him that in 4 years of relations with Zhao Manxi, Xiao had nothing with her. To stop unbearable headache, the guy reached for an anesthetic pill. But now the question was different. Hanfei needed to get closer to the princess in order to fulfill the order of his father. And Xiao was very disturbed by this. Therefore, now it was decided to take one of the personal guards of his father the next day, from which Luo could not just leave. Meanwhile, Yin Yin slept sweetly in the next room. Hua Hanfei and Fu Jiawei helped the girl get to the guest. At the end of the party, the girl greatly went through with alcohol and she was sick of that. The guys divided the friend and wiped it to put clean in bed. The next day, everyone returned to school, where of course there was Chu Yue and her secret guard Xiao Luo. But when the latter approached the classroom, someone invites Chu Yue to the concert and sincerely apologized. It was Han Fei, who knew that the girl liked the star Su Li, so he invited her to speak at a concert next week. Next to the guy was also an unknown man who had long hair and was much older than those present in the class. Han Fei played well the role of a young man who is simply trying to get to know the princess closer and treats everyone around him without enemies. Then he kindly greeted Xiao and asked why he decided after a loss in love to hide in college. The girls in the class were surprised that someone left their new classmate and immediately wanted an occupied place in his heart. Then Xiao thought about whether his personality was still not disclosed, and he was perceived for an ordinary student. Therefore, he decided to adhere to the old plan and cut down Hua before he tells something superfluous. But unfortunately, the bastard, took with him a martial artist who immediately became defended. Meanwhile, an unknown energy arose by a man and Xiao Luo, which did not allow them to cause damage to each other. The guy's hand seemed to stop in front of a strong wall and could not break it. Magic Gates talked about the presence of an internal skill in a man, which greatly interested Xiao. Two dexterous fighters continued to stand in vain opposite each other in an attempt to break through the magic gates, their eyes overwhelmed with rage, because each of them had his own mission to protect. The martial art master was sure that he would take out the head of his opponent. He understood that his inner skill was absolutely invincible, but Xiao easily blocked him, and thereby the man could not do anything. He understood that the guy is not as simple as it seems. Therefore, it is better not to provoke him. After that, he held out his hand to Han Fei and, ordering him to bow, apologized to Xiao for his master, who committed a lot of bad crimes, and now he came in order to ask for forgiveness and not continue the conflict. Then the fighter took Han Fei in his hands and in a matter of seconds flew out the window, thereby easily getting rid of a quarrel. Xiao Luo was even disappointed because he longed to get victory, but he was not allowed to do it. Then he looked at Chu Yue, who could not believe his own eyes, and that old man flew right out the window. Xiao decided to lie and said that men put a play about martial arts, so they should not pay attention to. Other girls, along with the princess, laughed and could not believe that the new classmate perceives them for the fools who did not understand anything. But for Xiao, everything was not so easy. Therefore, he turned to the system and asked what kind of equipment that person used. As it turned out, this is the ability in martial arts called Kui. In order to open the possibility of exchange of such abilities, you need to call and finish an additional task. A week later, football competitions were held at the college stadium. Xiaoluo also took part in them, as he loved active sports in order to maintain the dexterity and endurance of his own body. From time to time, the guy glanced at the girls who were puffing for his only male classmate. They could not resist and looked at him all the time, admiring the body and appearance of Xiao. For the sake of one of him, the whole class gathered at the field to look at the game once again. Also during the competition, there were many checkers who, without exception, had a good fit figure. The guy did not like the fact that each of them tried to attract his attention. I especially hated it when they came too close and almost strangled their arms. Meanwhile, Chu Yue left classes and always thought about that night when Xiaoluo saved her from danger. She could not forget the moment when the offender approached her and grabbed her face. Suddenly, her acquaintance came to the girl and asked why the princess was so staring at Xiao, as if she had fallen in love with him. But Chu Yue denied her words. They say a girl of such a level as she could not fall in love with an ordinary bully. Meanwhile, another student from their college watched the girls nearby. From the conversation of classmates, he realized that we were talking about Xiao Luo, and Du Panfei himself was not indifferent to their princess. Therefore, I decided to check who was now his competitor and went to the football field. There he introduced himself to Xiao and said that he had no one to play with, so he asked for help. Xiao did not know what to answer because he had no desire to meet someone. Moreover, Du seemed to him a rather suspicious guy. However, the latter decided not to wait for an answer, and having gone to the ball said that he was waiting for fair criticism in relation to his movements. After that, he looked at Xiao again, and through his eyes there was a desire to win. But in fact, he was sure that thanks to his skill, he would put an opponent in place and could prove something. Then the young man made all his efforts in the incredible blow of the tiger, which was his crown. It was because of this blow last week that one of the players broke his leg when he missed the ball. The audience immediately realized that there was some kind of enmity between Du Panfa and Xiao Luo. Because there were no other reasons for using this blow, Xu Yue continued to be in her thoughts all the time, since now she was really worried about the danger of others. Suddenly, she saw a blow of a tiger and a ball who flew at a frantic speed to Xiao Luo. She was scared for her savior and shouted that she was careful. However, the girl underestimated him too much. Xia could easily beat off the ball and calmly put it on the ground, which greatly surprised the audience. Other students began to discuss what they saw. After all, no one could take such a blow before. From the girls saw, they began to admire their beloved classmate even more, who studied rather dexterous. Du Panfei almost fell after he saw that someone was still able to fight back. Xiao understood that the guy was trying to humiliate him, so he is making maximum efforts in his every movement. And now he suggested Panfei to take his blow to also show skill. Luo decided not to wait for a satisfactory answer and hit the ball with all his strength. Seeing the power of Xiao Luo, the enemy almost lost consciousness, since by missing such a blow, one could lose life. But the Highlander was lucky, since Xiao specifically decided to scare him and threw the ball a little to the right than needed. He fell into the gate, but they could not stand the power of the blow and torn, as if they were made of thin fabric. After what he saw, Panfei fell to his knees, as if before he had already managed to say goodbye to life. But Xiao warned him that the next time he would throw him directly at the target. Suddenly, a strange roar was heard from the sky, reminiscent of a strong thunder, but the weather pointed to another. Now the exclamations of the greetings of the star Su Li, who arrived in this city, began to be heard to hold a concert. A plane from which a huge poster with a star depicted on it was lowered in the sky. The girl was really an incredible singer, behind whom a large audience fan. Xiao stood as if dug among the football field, and behind him was Chu Yue, in whose honor the concert was arranged. Soon hundreds of people gathered in the concert hall, and as if all together stopped breathing, waiting for the start of the song. And suddenly, the incredible Su Li went on stage in a luxurious dress that shone in every corner of the hall. Her song was about how she heard the sounds of falling rain to green grass, and at that time there were often calls to lessons. But the most important problem was that she did not hear the voice of her beloved. Her loyal fans sang every word and endlessly shouted her name. Some even had sticks that glowed in the dark and created the attached atmosphere. Xu Yue, for which it was all organized, was all the time without a mood. But her attention was concentrated on Xiaolo, who soon began to go towards the girl. The princess mentally almost began to jump with joy that the guy paid attention to her. She began to worry, because she could not understand her own feelings for Xiao, since until recently she hated him. But he passed by and said that he would go home earlier, and the girl emphasized that she would follow her safety. Suddenly she was even disappointed that now he was left alone, and in which case she could not stand up for herself. At that moment, the song sounded in the song that the parting was unforgettable. But the girl still did not look for a meeting with her beloved, having no answer why. Perhaps because she was shocked by laughter and crying, which overwhelmed her, or she tried to catch up with the heavenly fashion in order to be unsurpassed. Meanwhile, Hua Hanfei and his acquaintance Javawei talked near the stage. The heir ordered a friend to take Chu Yue to the hotel, and then he would take care of everything on his own. Xiolo suspected that these two transmit information to the enemies of Mr. Chu to substitute him. Jiavai tried to convey Hua that Princess Yue is not an easy girl, so it is difficult to persuade her to a joint pastime, but suddenly, the Zhao interrupted their role, who directly asked the men, do they really want to arrange an attack on Chu? And the concert gradually ended and Li was escorted with loud applause. The students discussed among themselves that the star is unsurpassed and no one expected to see her in this city. So while they had a chance, they wanted to get an autograph. After a successful concert, Li quickly changed clothes and went to her car. The car quickly collapsed and reserved only a trace on the asphalt from the wheels. Xiaolo felt something was wrong, so he followed the woman and went to look for a taxi. Then he found a free car with a driver and asked him to follow the machine that before that left the parking lot. 15 minutes later, they stopped near the hotel, which was near the concert hall. The car followed by Zhao parked and then went to the underground parking. The guy tried to behave carefully to remain unnoticed. When two got out of the car, it seemed to him that it was Fu Jiawei and Princess Chu Yue. It was a miracle to see a girl there, because before that, the singer Su Li was getting into the car. But now, the guy did not have a lot of thought, and he gave a large amount of money to the girl on the reception to tell him the number that the couple went to. The woman could not say directly, So she replied that she could not tell information about a person from 1502. After that, Zhao immediately rushed in search of an elevator to get to the room as soon as possible and prevent Zhao from mocking Chu Yue. The guy quickly found an elevator which depicted a singer, whose concert recently ended. As soon as Xiao ended up in the corridor, he heard the cries of a woman who called to the rescue through tears. Xiaoluo immediately realized that the sounds came from 1502, exactly the one that the woman indicated. Then the guy hit the door with all his might and they opened without the key, which was required for him. The door fell right on Fu Jiawei, but on the bed instead of Chu Yue, Hua Hanfei was sitting. The man was surprised when he saw Xiao, but his behavior was strange and unusual. Xiao began to laugh with what he saw, because he did not expect that two guys would have such a passionate love for each other. And Hanfei began to make excuses and said that although they used forbidden substances, they still took Su Li and not Chu Yue, which Luo protects so. But for the prohibited substances, Zhao now definitely wanted to knock out all the demons out of the guys. Fu Jiawei tried to reassure Xiao, but the young man was strongly determined to take revenge on fools for their behavior. This even brought him some pleasure to teach the villains. Then he swung his foot on the vital organs for those two and did not spare his strength to it. After that, he kicked the guys out of the hotel room and was left there alone, waiting for Xu Li to become better. In the meantime, he decided to pour tea and read more information on the internet about the prohibited substances that the guys used. In addition, they poisoned the star with these pills, so if you send it to the hospital, this will poorly affect her career. It was written on the sites that you need to drink water poisoned with certain substances, and various energetic exercises can help. But one of the options was just to wait until the effect of the drug ends, after which it becomes better for a person. The guy decided to dwell on the last version and give a lot of water to the girl. And if this does not help, then send her to a cold shower. When Xiao decided to go into the room of Su Li, she was lying all red and moaned that she was very hot. She could not calmly lie, as her body pierced unpleasant sensations. The girl was all wet and seemed to breathe hot air, so the water was supposed to help her soon to come to normal. Xiaoluo did not know how to behave correctly with such a respected woman, so he felt uncertain. Especially he was not comical at the moment when he saw how beautiful the girl was. He understood that the other guys would condemn him for the fact that he did not take advantage of the chance and simply gave the girl sleeping pills. But he knew that he was doing the right thing. He put a pill in his mouth and asked to swallow with the words that after that she would be better. But the girl's behavior changed dramatically, and she grabbed the young man by the neck, after which she pulled to her. Despite the fact that she was very hot, Li tried to snuggle up stronger against the guy. Xiaoluo understood that she was gradually falling asleep, but uncontrolledly does strange things. The guy tried to pull himself together and said that he would not use the moment and would continue to behave politely. But at one point in the action of Su Li became unbearable for him, so the temperature in the room rose. Xiao at that moment almost exploded, but laying the girl in bed decided to leave her alone. Therefore, now he simply waited until the effect of substances that were in her body would pass himself. He carefully covered it and beautifully laid out her silky and long hair on a pillow. Xiao was forced to leave her in this position, because he could no longer help. Suddenly the girl found the strength in herself, and holding her hand, Xiao threw him to her bed. After that, she no longer wanted to let the guy out of her arms and simply enjoyed his male physique in her fragile hands. At that moment, Xiaoluo realized that now he could not resist and female spells prevailed over him. Meanwhile, an unknown balloon was hung in the sky, where some discussions took place all the time. She was wearing an eccentric rabbit, which was holding binoculars in his hands and watched every action of Xiaoluo. There was also a guy on the ball, whose opinion always did not coincide with the opinion of a woman on their ship. Meanwhile, Princess Chu Yue calmly returned home and immediately went to her father's office. This time she came to talk about her personal guard, whom her father secretly sent to her. The girl demanded that dad say the place of residence of the young man, but the man could not do it, since finding Xiao for him became great difficulty. Therefore, he could not allow his daughter to bother the guy so that he would continue to engage in his work. But the girl explained that she just wants to give Xiao an invitation to a party that will be in honor of her birthday. Father knew the character of his daughter well and was afraid to risk her safety. But then he could not withstand the pressure from Chu Yue and decided to tell her the address, if only she did not distract him from work. The next day, Yue went to the guy's house and was sure that this time she would succeed. After all, Xiao cannot be so cold to her. The princess could not tolerate when someone did not obey her will, so now he had to compromise. Soon she found the house of evil and entered the staircase in search of the number of his apartment. And suddenly the girl saw the very star of Suli, which used to be incredibly fan. She was dressed in a male sweater and glasses to remain anonymous, and no one remembered her. However, Chu Wei immediately recognized the woman, whom she had seen on the big stage before that last night. The girls broke through in the corridor. But at that moment, inside Chu Yue, it was as if something broke, and she felt heaviness in her soul. He is a depressed mood. An invitation fell out of her hands, which she individually prepared for Xiao Luo. Suddenly, tears began to pour from her eyes, which was atypical for the princess, who was able to survive several attacks. Meanwhile, her personal guard lay in bed and tried to understand what happened to him last night. Then his system appeared and began to tell in detail what the user did. But as it turned out, at that moment it was not up to jokes. The young man was an urgent task. Below, under the entrance to Chu Yue, they attacked. And if Xiao solves this problem within 3 minutes, he will be able to get 100 points. Otherwise, he will take one random skill. Xiao did not even have time to get dressed, so I had to go outside in underwear. The guy even did not solve the system with the system, but still went out in search of a young princess. Then the system told him to go down the stairs and after that turn left. A personal guard had a funny look for him, but still went outside and quickly found Chu Yue. The girl was sitting on the ground like a frightened kitten, and there was a stranger again near her. He held a knife in his hands and rejoiced that he had a new opportunity to meet with Miss Chu. The criminal did not expect to see someone else on that dark street, so he immediately reacted to the sounds nearby. He had not yet had time to bounce off, as Xiaoluo immediately swung and hit the thief with his foot on his face. He felt the power of the guy, since now there was a red trace on his face. But Xiao did not stop and began to put pressure further with his foot to hit the thief with his head against the wall. He began to beg for mercy, but Luo finally wanted to end him and prepared his fists. Suddenly, the system decided to joke about the appearance of the hero. But the guy was seriously configured and asked the thief who sent him. But he replied that the pool of black water could absorb heaven and earth, so Xiao is now a corpse. However, the guy did not understand what the offender was talking about and asked for a black pool. But their conversation was killed by 2 guards who should have always been next to Chu Yue. But each time they were late. But thanks to Xiao, everything ended well again, and the men were infinitely grateful to him. Now the system decided to reward the user for his dexterity and gave the promised 100 points. But since the art of running in his underpants shocked others, he received 250 points from above. The system continued to joke about the user's clothes, but he could no longer stand it and ordered her to shut up. Xiao ordered the guards to return to Mr. Chu and not to forget to ask if he knows about the black water basin, which would absorb heaven and earth. But in order to continue his day, the guy took the suit from the guard and left him in underwear. A few days later, the morning of the birthday of Chu Yue came, at the party of which Xiao was not invited. On that day, Mr. Chu met with a young man and said that now his work of his daughter's personal guard would be completed. But according to their agreement, not even a month passed, as he had to leave his work now. Then the man explained that his opponent was weakened and now he could take advantage of the chance to get rich. But if it were not for his daughter's birthday, he would not have left a wet place from the enemy. Xiaoluo sincerely greeted the man and immediately asked if he learned about the meaning of the phrase he spoke. The man began to tell what exactly the criminals mean by the words of black water. It was a large transnational criminal organization, but suddenly, a subordinate. Mr. Chu burst into the room and had bad news. As it turned out, a group of mercenaries entered the city last night. There were suspicions that this was a group of Red Scorpio from the company Blackwater. Xiaoluo and Mr. Chu were shocked by the news, since the information was really disappointing. But most of all, they were worried about the position of Chu Yue, which will now become the main goal for enemies. The guy decided not to waste time and ordered him to be taken to that criminal group. Then the young man confidently walked from the office and expected an accurate location. But the subordinate Mr. Chu said that Xiao could take his car, standing right at the exit. From it, it was possible to track the whereabouts of Miss. The guy thanked and told Mr. Chu that in the city it could be quite noisy. Therefore, a man would have to resolve everything thanks to his connections. Xiaoluo got into the car and immediately began to punch where it is Chu Yue. Meanwhile, one of the snipers named Walter was instructed to shoot around the guard while the rest are shocked. You need to grab the target. The thief quickly accepted the instruction and already saw his goal. The man immediately instructed a weapon on a woman and 2 men, so he had to shoot near them. Then, by the radio, he handed the signal that he was ready to execute the order and so that everyone else would prepare. A few minutes later, Xiaolo drove through the bypass route to get to the Princess of Chu. He drove the car with all his might in order to exactly have time, and everything was fine with the girl. Several times during the road, he almost crashed into other cars. As he followed the monitor after the location of Miss Chu, suddenly he felt something strange and decided to stop the car, sharply pressing the brake. At that moment, the car stopped and left a bunch of smoke behind him because of the wheels erased on the asphalt. The system prompted the user about the presence of the king of the mercenaries. The guy understood that somewhere nearby the sounds of shots were heard, and now he needed to get rid of the sniper. Then, Xiaolo rushed to run to the approximate place, from where the sound could be heard. He understood that now it was more important than ever to run with all legs, since the situation could end more than one death. A group of mercenaries was too dangerous, so even an armed police could not overcome them. But Xiao did not doubt himself, and running into the clearing, he saw a man with weapons and in complete uniform. He watched the girl who helped the organization to deliver messages. According to the criminal, she looked good, and in general he liked the figure of the Chinese women. Xiaolo realized that he had to act, so he reached for a knife and took him, put a sniper to the neck to neutralize him, but only threats were not done, because Xiao inflicted several stab wounds right in the back of the criminal, and he quickly bleeded. Soon, through the radio, Walter reported that everything went successfully and ordered to prepare for evacuation. Then Xiao replied that their partner had died and heard threats in his direction. But the guy was not scared and even became interesting what price he would have to pay for his act. Then he took up the weapon that was left of the sniper and thought that now he would see who else would pay for his actions. Meanwhile, Chu Wei was detained, and Shu Lan stood near her. The princess was always kind to her, so she did not understand why she received such revenge. But the girl replied that no one forced Mr. Chu to cross the road to Blackwater. Then, a man who held Yue came a notice of the death of a warrior and an order of urgent evacuation. Black-tailed handed over his groups about tragic death to other fighters. After that, taking in his arms to Princess Chu, he told everyone to urgently follow him. The team, whose member was a strange hare, immediately left the place of stay and went to the forest. And suddenly, during the flight right in the heart of the hare, a high-speed bullet hit, which did not know where it appeared. Then, the black-tailed thought that before he had not noticed an animal among the composition of their team. And while they stopped in thought, then another member of the team also flew in the leg. Someone ordered him to be left and took their main goal to go further. The bald-named Black-tailed could not leave a comrade in trouble, but he had no choice. Throwing on the shoulder of Chu Yue, he promised a friend that he would surely shoot an unknown young man and take revenge on him. Meanwhile, the crippled fighter tried to carefully crawl out of the forest to call someone to the rescue. But suddenly, Xiao appeared in front of him and asked if their fraternity is really in this when the brothers abandon each other in trouble. However, Luo did not have much time in speech, and he asked the criminal where the bald man who left him ran. Then the offender realized that Xiao specially shot him in the leg, so that then with the help of his weakness, to track down where others were. After that, he took out his weapon and directed it to Xiao to send him to hell. But the guy was pretty dexterous and quickly dodged a bullet that flew right into him. Then, he jumped to the criminal and took him by the neck to also deprive him of the opportunity to harm others. He became funny from a guy who seemed to have revised all kinds of dramas and considered himself an incredible hero. After that, Xiao Blue decided not to hesitate, and with one pressure on the neck of the thief, he left his chances of life. Blackwater killed so many guards Mr. Chu, but Xiao did not let them go for the simple abduction of Princess Yue. After completing the case with one criminal, Xiao got up and began to inspect the territory around the forest. Most recently, it was raining, so there were traces of a man who ran in an unknown direction with a girl in his arms. Then the guy carefully examined traces of shoes and followed them in order to quickly find his goal. The young man ran very well, and he still managed to find a black-tailed one who was running away. Xiao decided to suddenly attack a man so that he did not have the time to get a weapon, thereby complicating the mission. Xiaolo directly in the air struck a strong blow to the new man and he immediately fell. Due to the fall, he could not hold Princess Chu, because of which all this happened. The girl was tied up, and she could not stand on her own to start running away. Xiao decided to completely bring the case with a bald criminal, and began to ruthlessly beat him on the head. Suddenly, he saw how unknown people began to run away in a reservoir nearby, who were also armed and entered the Blackwater team. Luo turned to Chu Yue, and taking her in his arms began to run softly to follow other criminals. The Yue trailer tried to break out of the rescuer's hands, because she did not have time to recover and still thought that someone else was abducted by her. Then Xiao decided to turn to her in a calm voice. and the girl realized that this was her classmate, who saved her again. However, the guy did not have much time, and he asked the princess to be silent so as not to disrupt his business. He ordered the girl to stay stronger behind his neck, since now they would have to run even faster. Before that, Xiao planned to maintain strength so that he was definitely enough for all possible fights. But there was no choice. Now he is responsible not only for himself, but also for Chu Yue, who could not protect herself. Therefore, holding the girl in her arms, Xiao jumped incredibly high to break away from the mercenaries. Meanwhile, a strange hair nevertheless recovered and addressed his director with a statement that Xiao had shot him. In addition, the guy could jump to a height of 2 meters while having another person in his arms, so now he looked like a robot. Suddenly, other members of the group heard screams somewhere nearby and decided to run to the sound. As it turned out, it was a reason for Chu, who was terribly frightened by the Jiao jump and began to screech loudly because of this. Shai ordered her to shut up, because with her shouts, she intonates both of them. Suddenly, the girl decided to recall the very situation when she saw a star, Li Li leaving the young man's apartment. But he did not have time to talk. So Xiao broke a straw and ordered Chu Yue to keep her in his mouth. He tried to think through the best plan for how to protect the girl's life. After that, he carefully laid it under the water and ordered it to calmly lie there, and a straw for breathing. Now the princess had to obediently lie there and not get out until Xiao himself would allow her. The main and his entire team continued to search for Xiao, since now he has become with the main enemy. Suddenly, the man noticed traces of the shoes of the young man and pointed to them to other colleagues to carefully look. He was sure that he would burst somewhere nearby. So now he decided to rely on these traces. Meanwhile, Chu Yue obediently was underwater and breathed thanks to a tube that looked out of the water. Xiaoluo incredibly smartly acted, thereby confusing the mercenaries in her search. He did not understand why he spent so much time in search, but there is still no result. Even the shadow of Xiao was not nearby. In addition, the guy was not alone, so according to thieves, he really has good skills. While the men said, a rope appeared under the neck of the youngest, and the guy decided to make it more carefully. As it turned out, Xiaoluo threw off the rope from the tree and pulled the criminal to his branch thanks to him. If Xiao kept a guy named Red Ghost in the air a little longer, the latter would have died quickly. But Luo had another goal and he still raised the criminal, removing the rope from his neck. The Red Ghost was all red, since for a certain time he could not breathe and make a single sound due to a failed neck. Meanwhile, the commander-in-chief of the group was surprised exactly where one of his warriors disappeared. Then he contacted a man, nicknamed Hawk, and handed him about the mystical disappearance of the soldier. But looking at the whereabouts that every soldier had, the man was surprised, since the Red Ghost was still next to him. Xiao decided not to waste time in vain and end another enemy. Therefore, with all his strength, he jumped from a tree directly to a man from below. In addition, he stuck a knife into his chest, because of which he quickly died. The commander-in-chief turned to the deceased, nicknamed Goril, because he heard a noise through the radio. But instead of a fighter, Xiao answered, who said that there were still alleged victims left. The Hawk began to worry about his other brothers, who were now also threatened by death. Now Xiao Lao had a weapon, and he decided to apply it against other criminals. Soon he found several warriors who just walked in search of him, and one of them immediately shot him in the head. After that, without waiting, he aimed at the head of another guy and applied the perfect shot. Now there were 9 living fighters remained, and Xiao went to search for them to finish it as soon as possible. He managed to find their lair, and now all the soldiers were in a slight access to his skilled blows. Xiaoluo quickly killed 3 more mercenaries, almost not making efforts to that because everyone took his weapon from each. Another trinity decided to rush at him, but the men did not know that for them it would finish as badly as for the whole group. Now there were very few criminals who could harm Mr. Chu and his only daughter. Soon he found 2 more, whom he killed with his bare hands, having only a sharp knife. Now it remained to deal with the commander-in-chief. He came to him and, threatening with a knife, ordered him to call for their colonel. The man immediately refused and said that the guy's skills are of course better than all his soldiers, but Blackwater would not leave him alive. Xiaoluo did not allow the Hawk to finish and brutally thrust his knife into his throat, from which he died. The guy immediately went to Chu Yue to help get out of the water. He advised the girl to immediately take off her dress at home, otherwise she would get sick. After that, he gave the princess the telephone that her father had previously given him, and also ordered Yue to never talk about his secret lesson. He left the girl alone and decided to leave first so that he was not suspected of some kind of connection with Miss Chu. As soon as the girl came home, her father and police were waiting for her, The police officer listened to everything and promised that law enforcement officers would no longer embarrass them. But if Miss Chu still remembers something else, then they will definitely come quickly to find out all the information. Then Mr. Chu turned to his subordinate Lan Zuo and asked him to help him to hold a policeman. When the man left their house, his father immediately put his daughter in bed so that she rested after such stress. Then he closed the girl's room and was finally sure that she was safe. Meanwhile, the princess could not fall asleep because of her thoughts about Xiao Luo and his unsurpassed beauty. Yue longed to shift him to blush with shame. Mr. Chu returned to the hall and soon came Lan Zuo, who was leading the police from his house. Chu shared with his subordinate that he plans to invite Xiao to the pavilion Yungshan, to invite him to keep him well for preserving his life and his daughter. Now, the task of laziness Zuo was to organize everything so that dinner would really pass with dignity. The next day, the Chu and Xiaolo family visited Chanshangai, where a good table with goodies was set. Then Mr. Chu decided to say a toast, and he was in honor of the gratitude of Xiao, who saved the life of his only daughter. But the young man replied that he simply did his work, so he did not consider it necessary to organize such feasts. Soon, Ladia Zuo came and brought a folder with the documents that the boss asked him to prepare. As it turned out, Chu recently bought one new company and a manager was needed there, so the man offered the position of Xiao. Suddenly, Hua Zhangong, Father Hua Hanfei, burst into the hall, who ordered his guards to carry out of the premises of Xiao Luo. The man came to take revenge on his son and was terribly angry. Then Mr. Chu entered the conversation and asked Zhangong what he wants to do. The man explained that Xiao crippled his son, and now he decided to cripple the guy in response. Like, he is a guard who should not be protected. A couple of Chu was still on the other life of Xiao, but he forbade him to break into his pavilion and violate the feast. These actions greatly humiliated him, so the man ordered Lan Zuo to take Hua Zhangong from the room. Hearing this, the director himself decided to go out, but warned that Chu could not defend Xiao everywhere. Then, Hua Zhen asked to translate Lun San Kui that he agreed to the proposed proposal, and in exchange for this he wanted to get the head of Xiao Luo. Mr. Chu returned to the meal, where the young man thanked him for the protection from Huanhen. After that, the man returned to the folder with documents again and said that it is difficult to find a person whom you can completely trust. However, Xiao was one of them. Xu understood the hint and said that the work is very good, but he is still hoping to rise thanks to his own forces along the career ladder. Mr. Cheich noted that if Xiao nevertheless agrees, he will become truly manager of the company Luo Fan. He himself needs only dividends in the amount of 20%, and everything else will go to Luo himself. The conditions sounded quite pleasant, so the young man asked for a while to think about the offer. The man smiled joyfully and decided to give the guy 3 days so that he could definitely decide. And after a successful conversation, the men joyfully raised their glasses and continued the meal. After a delicious lunch, Xiao Luo returned to the car and asked the system why, after so many murders, he feels nothing. As it turned out, the system forgot to warn that the body of the king of mercenaries includes psychological qualities. So this is a normal phenomenon. Suddenly, someone called on the phone of Xiao, but he did not want to answer. However, the phone continued to vibrate endlessly. As it turned out, it was John and Shan, who had a serious conversation for his old acquaintance. When they met, the old acquaintance told about what he knew about the work of the security guard Xiao at the rich lady. Most of all, he wanted to know the details about whether they have something more than working relations. But Xiao did not want to bring the conversation to this and said that he hired Chu Yunsun, and he is a really good person. But John continued to insist on his own and said that the view of Xiaoluo will be enough for 20 years. The guy did not understand what this was said to, so he decided to clarify. Zhang said that during their last conversation, Xiao told him about how Zhao Manchitzi went to Hua Hanfei. Luo remembered the very day when he first completed the system task and saved a little girl. But these details did not interest Janya, and he decided to get down to business, so he took out a photo of a woman. Xiaoluo glanced at her and thought, was his friend met with this girl for the last time? The guy tried to restrain his true opinion and replied that she was quite feminine, so as not to condemn the taste of Zhang. But as it turned out, this woman was the direct chief of Zhani, who every day arranges for him difficult situations to prevent him. He could not leave work, but the house of Xiao was closer to the office, so the guy asked if they could beat together. But suddenly the phone of Xiao Luo began to call again, and he had to be distracted from the conversation. As it turned out, it was the sister of Zhu and who invited her brother to a joint dinner with the best girl at her hotel. Xiao did not tell his sister about breaking up with Zhao Manchitzi, but as it turned out, Zhang did, who tried to get closer to the girl. After the conversation, Zhu turned to her friend and said that her brother was really handsome. What she would make sure when they would meet the next day? Sun Yu looked like a rather sweet and shy girl, so she just smiled in response to these words. Janya had an idea when he heard about the date of his friend. Then he decided to bring the guy to the beauty salon so that professionals work on his image before meeting with a girl. Zhang left Xiao in the cabin, and he was waiting for him near the clearing. Soon Luo came to him by taxi. Judging by the expression of the young man's face, Zhana realized that he did not really like the way he looks now, but there was no more time. Yes, Shan was still trying to assure his friend that the man he left him is really a master of his craft. They walked a little and soon the sister of Ju called for her brother, who also prepared her friend for a date. The guy felt uncomfortable because he was not used to such meetings that he was not ready. The guy's sister was delighted that she nevertheless persuaded Zhan and Shanya to take him to change. Otherwise, given his character, it is not even clear what he could come of. But for starters, the girl decided to find out everything and asked why Zhang was also present at this meeting. But while the guy was trying to make excuses, Sun Yu decided to introduce himself first and blushed greatly at that moment. Xiao of course also greeted, but he really did not like the concept of dates blindly. To distract from unnecessary emotions, Sun Yu called to the waiter to finally place an order. Then Ju raised her hand and offered to talk about each other while they would eat. What I did not receive support from others. Zhang decided to push Xiao on a step and told him that the girl was quite beautiful. At that moment, Xiao Luo realized that they were all conspired and specially trying to reduce him with a stranger. 2 hours later, on the table lay a lot of waste. He was seafood, and Sun apologized for being too carried away by them. Then, Ju immediately turned to her brother and asked what he was thinking about her friend. The guy had no choice but to the fact that Sun was very good. But in fact, at that time he did not need to fall in love. So Xiao did not consider the girl as a future partner. Suddenly, Ju reached out and said that she would move, so she asked Janya to take her home. The guy was without a mood, and replied that her husband Tanjin himself would take her himself, and he was not going to be her servant. Then the girl got up from the table and taking Janya by the hand, she said that he should not interfere with her brother to arrange her personal life. And the Xiaolo himself ordered that he would definitely spend Sun Yu home. The guy and the girl were in the institution until night, so Xiao was obliged to make sure that everything was fine with Sun. When they were not far from her house, the girl said that she could reach, but Xiao insisted to lead her to the steps in the house. In addition, he promised his sister to deliver her girlfriend home whole and not damaged. The street near the house Sun was not lit with lanterns, so at night it was quite dangerous there. Suddenly, a man of older fled near the house and begged for help. Xiao immediately began to defend his new acquaintance, because he did not know what thieves could be near. But when the girl heard the man's voice, I immediately realized that it was her native uncle. Unknown men, in front of which they were the main one, appeared out of nowhere and heard the words of Sun Yu about the fact that this is her uncle. The man said that now the debts of a girl's relative will fall on her, and she is responsible for his life. Sun did not know what debts we're talking about and asked who these people are. Meanwhile, her uncle had already been put on her knees. Uncle was still what they would do with him. He was ready to risk his own life. However, he could not give his niece to offend, and immediately rushed to defend the girl so that she would not be touched. Then, one of the guards quickly measured his uncle's intentions and greatly hit him with his fist in the face. Sun Yu could not restrain her tears when she saw how they were mocking her relative. Yes, and other guards also did not let the girl herself. Suddenly, Sun Jianan said the main one among those criminals that his niece looks good. Therefore, he proposed to be taken as a repayment of duty. Then he went to the girl and with a threat asked if she would go on a dark night to feed the fish with his body. Suddenly, Xiao Luo appeared, who quietly moved away during a terrible conversation. As it turned out, the guy shot everything, so he did not intervene in a fight before and did not defend a new girlfriend. Then the young man ordered the bandits to quickly finish everything. Otherwise, he would call the police and show her a video. The main smiled and asked Xiao, is he really sure that he could threaten him? And if he really wants them to leave, he must pay 2 million in the gambling hall. The guy replied that he was not connected with this, so he should not pay. In addition, he has no money. But since he was familiar with the accused's niece, he cannot ignore. Then Xiao asked for half an hour, for which he will have time to give 2 million chips and reset the debt. The man warned that in his casino the minimum rate of 10,000 yuan, so he asked if the guy could afford it. Xiao Lo took out his card and said that it was on it 100,000 yuan, so that will be more than enough. Sun Yu began to calm the guy and begged that he would not leave, since this person is the owner of a casino and marriage, and just like that. In addition, they are not so familiar that Xiao understands her problems. Then the guy reassured her that he would never do what he was not sure of. After these words, he turned to the system and asked if she had any skills for gambling. And I received an answer that it was possible to exchange professionalism in gambling in 600 points, to which he immediately agreed. Now his account was 218 points left, but the main thing was now to win. 30 minutes later, the owner of the casino ordered the guards to send the car immediately to him. After that, the car was delivered and a man, along with Sun Yu, her uncle and Xiaoluo, went to the place of his possession. The businessman immediately told the guy that having entered this room, it was simply impossible to escape. Xiu took out his bank card and ordered that the money on it was exchanged for game chips. Sun Yu was most worried about the fact that she did not know how she would repay her rescuer later. Suddenly, Sun Jianan approached Xiao and said that he would take on the consequences. Sun Yu was trembling all the time and was very worried about what would eventually be with her and her family. But Xiao tried to calm the girl and said that he was nearby, and that means a lot. Soon the owner of the casino came and brought chips for the entire amount that was on the map. Not having a lot of time to think, Xiaoluo immediately went to the gambling table, where he could now use his skill for the first time. The host of the game commented on her every step and voiced how exactly the bones fell. Xiaoluo calculated his every step and tried to make the right decision that influenced the life of a whole family. Suddenly, he calculated 4, 5, 6, and as a result was high stack. Now he decided to really take a chance and took out the gambling bill, a face value of 100,000. Then he confidently said that he was making the maximum rate, and then the bones opened. Then a lot of people gathered around the gambling table, and the prediction of Xiaoluo came true. He really had high stack. The man who led the game first saw such an incredible result from the first bet. Therefore, having more game money, Xiao decided to continue to play in order to repel the entire amount. After the first victory, he was sure of the skill that recently exchanged. Meanwhile, the owner of the casino was in the video surveillance room, from where every gaming table was visible. He was especially closely watched by Xiaoluo, whom he began to suspect of fraud. However, the guard carefully watched the past record and said that the young man plays absolutely honestly. Suddenly, one of the guards burst into the room and told the head of Gina that that young man had already won more than 1.5 million. Then the owner began to rage and ordered the employees to put another bone abandonment. The guard immediately attached the information to the man who accompanied the game of Xiao and ordered Mr. Zhu to come instead of him. Then, at the gaming table, the man apologized to Xiao and said that he needed to urgently leave. And after these words, the same Mr. Zhu appeared immediately, who quickly took the place of the dealer. The man began to shake the bones. But at that moment, Xiao immediately realized that something had changed and was going against the rules. After the guy felt the changed bones, he hesitated for a long time above the next step and did not know what he should now put on. Everyone began to put pressure on him, since many in this room knew about Mr. Tezhu, who did not just come. Then Sun Yu saw changes in the behavior of Xiao and asked him what had happened. Mr. Tezhu asked the guy why he had made bets so quickly and now so suddenly began to doubt. Xiaoluo laughed and directly asked the dealer if he really does not know what the reason is. Then the abandonment of Kostya began to be nervous. Did someone not notice his fraud? It was this reaction and this facial expression that Xiao expected to see when he spoke his words. The dealer began nervously asking the player whether he would bet, since he had passed the move for the 5th time. Suddenly, Waolo had a brilliant plan and he decided to share it with Sun Jianan to help him. The man began to doubt the correctness of these actions, but he had no choice but to listen to the advice. Xiu emphasized that everything will be fine and he will certainly win all the money and give the debt. Meanwhile, Jia thought that only he in this game decides which bet would play and which no. So now for Xiao, the opportunity for victory was closed. Suddenly, the owner of the casino appeared in the gambling hall and told the guy that he had already expired for 30 minutes. But Xiaoluo smiled kindly and said that he would definitely win everything. So, there is nothing to adjust. Then the guy finally decided to bet and waited for Jia to start throwing the bones again. The dealer warned that this time it is impossible to skip the bet, and it is mandatory. Xiaoluo looked at closed bones with concentration and seemed to try to read through the glass that would be under it. Then he finally exhaled and called his headquarters in the size of high stack. Jia smiled and thought that he would do everything possible so that Xiao would definitely lose all the money. He could easily control the bones and indicate to them exactly what amount should fall. The owner of the casino continued to watch the game and was sure that his employee would settle everything. Suddenly, people around the table began to shout joyfully, and the stavka of Xiao really played. The young man realized that he still managed to figure out Jia's cunning plan and decided to put another bet, much larger. He calculated 3, 3, 4, 10 points, and it was high stack. The owner of the casino was incredibly angry. He longed to leave the curtain without a penny on the account and destroy the Sun family for their debts. Then Zhao approached him and returned 2 million chips, and the rest of the winner asked to return to his card. Their game took all night, so everyone returned home early in the morning. Uncle Sun thanked the guy and said that he could contact him at any time. But he warned that the casino was not entirely simple, and since Xiao won quite a lot, he should be careful. Suddenly, Sun Yu came up to the guy and invited him to take a taxi together and go at least somewhere. She worried about Xiao Luo, so she offered him to temporarily move. However, he was confident in himself and said that in which case he could handle himself. Meanwhile, the manager Jean could not accept his defeat in any way, and his guard asked, would they really leave it all? But the man replied that they were a casino, and not a charitable agency, which would just give someone such an amount of money to someone. He ordered all the guys who could fight well and ambush near the house of that girl. Meanwhile, Mr. Sun said that he had to go home and please his family with good news. Then Zhao asked him not to play money anymore, so as not to risk his life. The man already understood the fact that this is a bad idea. Therefore, with ease on his soul, he sat in a taxi. Xiaolo also called the car and told the girl to get there so that he would finally spend it home and was sure that everything was fine with her. As soon as they got into the car, the girl asked the driver a pen and a piece of paper. Then, Sun began to write something like a receipt where she indicated her name and the amount that she should return to Xiao Luo, after which the girl smiled sweetly to her savior and said that she would return everything to a penny. The driver was surprised at what he heard in the backseat of his car, but he did not comment on it. The guy replied that Sun should not do this. Moreover, he did not lose anything, but on the contrary, earned another 4,000 on top. But the girl was sure that she should repay everything, as she would feel guilty. Xiao decided not to argue with Sun, who had a rather stubborn character. But when they rode in the car, he realized that she was quite beautiful and smart. In addition, he does not use his money. Suddenly, Sun turned to him and asked about a secret. However, for some reason, the guy did not hear her. She tried to understand how the guy knew the exact sum of the numbers that would appear on the bones. Then Zhao replied that this was just luck. Sun smiled and said that now it seems she better to stay closer to him. Like, because of this, her luck may be better. These words cheered the guy. Having discussed the past night a little more, Sun and Xiao reached a good house. There they got out of the car and the girl said that this place where she lives. Xiaoluo was glad to spend her and said that it was already quite late, so he should also return home. Suddenly, the girl before leaving asked if Xiao could lend her her phone. Then the girl took the phone of Xiao Luo and began to write something there, which seemed very strange for the guy. But soon she gave the phone and said that now they have contacts of each other and can calmly go home. It was a rather cute act from the girl, so the guy smiled and joyful went home. She once again thanked him for goodbye and asked him to be careful on the road. The girl signed the contact of Xiao as a person who gives money and even managed to put his photo. Xiao Luo went home to home with a completely new area for him. Then he had never been to these parts before. The place was also similar to all other areas of the city. There were also high houses in some places, and somewhere there were old remnants of history. The guy walked and thought about his life, not expecting some danger, but suddenly his gaze changed a lot when he saw many men with bats in front of him. One of them came up and told Xiao that he has incredible talent to make 2 million winnings out of 100,000 yen. Brother Jean was not too happy about this, so he asked them to show the player what a real bloody bath is. She said that now he is in a good mood and did not want to fight, so he advised men to leave him alone. The men got angry because they did not like the confidence of Xiao in their own abilities, so they rushed to the guy with the whole company. Meanwhile, Zhang Dashan sat in one of the best establishments of the city when Xiao Luo suddenly called him. The guy asked his friend to take the car and arrive after him, because there was such a situation that he cannot go by taxi. Zhang was ready to leave his meal without demand and went to the aid of a friend. When he only parked the car near Xiao, he could not believe his eyes when he saw what was happening behind the guy's back. But Xiaoluo looked quite calm. So when Zhanya told Zhang that everything was fine with him, like between ordinary gangsters there was a quarrel, so they themselves beat each other. Zhang understood that these people would not fight each other. But Xiao suggested that they go to eat and discuss everything during the meal. His friend agreed with this proposal, but provided that Xiao will pay their account, wanting to hear the details of the story as soon as possible. but Shan quickly drove the car, and they were near a good institution. There they were, waiting for a waiter who prepared a table for two and held guests. At the table, Zhang asked Xiao, did he not defend his daughter Chu Yunxun in this month? After all, this is the richest man of Jiang'an. The guy had many questions. It was especially worried about why this person decided to give his new company to an almost unfamiliar guy. But Xiaoluo did not understand how the comrade found out that he would be able to receive the company. But without hearing the answer, he immediately added that he himself had not yet decided whether to agree to him or not. After all my life I wanted to have my own business, although I still did not know which one. Suddenly, Xiao saw that Zhang's behavior had changed a lot, and he seemed to be unhappy. He explained that due to what was happening behind him, drum membranes would soon burst. As it turned out, behind him was a manual company of young people, loudly discussed their life situations and laughed at them. The waiter passed by the Xiao table, and Zhang decided to take the opportunity, so he stopped the girl. He explained that he was uncomfortable to sit due to the noise of a neighboring company, so he asked for something to do. The waiter understood the situation and asked the guest to move to the next table, or behaved quieter. The man to whom the waitress approached was already drunk and said that he would cross only when she kisses him. Other girls and companies began to support the idea, and he added that then there would be no problems. Chang could not stand such a boorish attitude towards the girl and said that he himself would deal with the unexplored guests. Then the stranger said that he would cross, but only in order to so that Zhang would no longer ache. The latter tried to restrain his emotions so that the situation did not go to the quarrel further. So he agreed. 40 minutes later, the guys finally ate, and Xiaoluo felt much better. The guys had a little food left, but they no longer wanted to eat further, and Zhanya came up with the idea of revenge. He calmly went his hands, then returned to the table and took the dish in his hands. After that, he approached the stranger who behaved without respect for him and to the waitress, and poured his food on his head. The man began to scream, and Zhang said that just like that he would not leave this situation. Then yes, Shan grabbed the stranger by the neck and began to hit hard with his fist that he was already bleeding. Zhang said he had a good mood until this bastard ruined it. Then Xiaoluo appeared and asked his friend to stop. Otherwise, he would have to call an ambulance, and with her the police. Zhang threw the fool on the table and added, if he once still sees this, he would not leave him alive. Soon the guy, along with Xiaoluo, returned to the car and his friend asked if Chu Yunxun gave him time to think. Yes, Shan did not understand what the problem was and why Xiao still did not agree. Indeed, in his hands there may be a large company that does not even need to be bought. And at that moment, Xiaoluo realized that he could really try to buy Luo Fan so as not to feel like a debtor. Jana did not understand what Xiao was talking about, but he asked him to follow the road and said that the next day they would go to Pavilion Yungshan. Then yes, Shan thought that his friend would still agree, and he would be able to climb the career ladder together. The guy was all the time focused on the thoughts of the company, so he did not follow the road and got into a car accident. Xiaoluo divided because he warned his comrade, but he did not listen to him. And even despite the fact that his car had already begun to evacuate, Zhang still asked Xiao if he would agree to Mr. Chu's proposal. Xiaoluo was already tired of these questions, so he simply told a friend to go home rather. The next morning, the guys dressed well and huddled to go to Pavilion Changshan to a business meeting. Xiaoluo asked Zhang to wait at the door, as he would return soon. The comrade asked that the latter bought him some fruits as much as possible, because he did not feel very well. Meanwhile, Xiaoluo met with Lan Zuo, and he ordered him to follow him. Laziness. Zuo led the guy to his boss's office, who was already waiting for his long-awaited guest. The man hoped that his personal defender nevertheless made a decision, and it would be the way he expected. Then Xiaoluo said that he had already thought over everything and handed him a piece of his own records. Mr. Chu began to study them, and, as it turned out, it was a loan receipt where Xiao perfectly painted everything. The guy noted that Mr. Chu spent 550 million on the purchase of Luo Fan, and now he wants to redeem this company for 600 million. But there is a small problem. Now Mr. Chu realized that the young man wanted to talk to him about the business, that he could not please him. According to the study of Xiao in the assessment, at the moment, Luo Fan brings only a loss, about 300,000 per day. This company can be called hot potatoes, and no one will easily be with it. Then Mr. Chu asked the guy why then he was ready to buy her, and he explained that he was confident in his abilities and will be able to restore the work of Luo Fan. However, even Mr. Chu doubted that he could independently return the greatness of Luo Fan. So he asked Xiao why he was so confident in himself. Then Xiaoluo began to tell his thoughts on this, and as it turned out, The problem of Luo is not only in her reputation. There are also many problems in the enterprise and in the organizational structure of the company. Mr. Cho listened and again asked the rather young guy whether he could like to return the business to consciousness. But Xiaoluo replied that he would not give specific promises so that he would not be accused later. Now he wanted to know only one thing, whether Mr. Chu is ready to sell him Luo Fan for his amount. The man thought and said that in this case, receipts for 600 million would not be enough. Xiao could not understand why he could not just agree, because he already took on an almost impossible task. Then Mr. Chu asked the guy to promise him something, and then he would agree to give Luo Fan. Xiaoluo could promise a lot, but looking at how crazy this request would be, Mr. Chu said that in the case when Xiao could not repay him a debt within a year, he would work in his pavilion Chongshan. The task was not so incredible, so Xiao held out his hand as a sign of consent. Now Mr. Chu was looking forward to the day when the guy nevertheless came to work to him, but Xiaoluo said that this would definitely not be, and he would do everything possible for this. Meanwhile, Zhang Shang was waiting for a comrade who was at a business meeting for quite some time. But soon he saw Xiaoluo, who was walking with a serious face, which alerted and Shanya. The guy all this time tried to pass the time and played a small ball that threw toward Xiao and said to catch. But to the question whether everything went successfully, Zhao ordered Zhanya to return and wait for the news. He didn't just want to tell everything. 5 days later, Xiaoluo spent time at home and suddenly a bell rang on his phone. The guy picked up the phone and could not understand exactly who was calling him. He was informed that Boss Chu asked him to convey that today, after lunch, Luo Fan would officially be sent to him. As it turned out, it was Lan Zuo, who was engaged in all the documentation of Mr. Chu. At that moment, Xiaoluo remembered Zhang, who now lived in his apartment and began to call for a guy. He calmly rested in the living room, which now became his room, and did not understand the reason for such a noise for the whole apartment. Xiu in a hurry put on a suit and asked Zhang, does he really not want to know about the details of that meeting with Chu? Soon, the former employees of the company and many other people gathered near the pavilion who strongly doubted that the young guy could restore Luo Fan. Like without the protection of the pavilion Yungshan, their Luo Fan will be undressed to the bones, and he will end. Soon, Xiaoluo appeared in the crowd, who was dressed in an ideal suit to make the right impression. As soon as the women saw the new owner, they immediately changed their opinion about him. Careers made up to fascinate the female part of the company with their beauty. Among the whole crowd stood one person who wanted to quickly tell the guy all the details so as not to attract strangers to this. He went to Xiaoluo and introduced himself as Xu Guansun, who currently leads all the affairs of Luo Fan. The man held the post of deputy director. Fortunately, Xiaoluo looked at the list of company managers in advance. Then, Xu Guansun decided to imagine whether it is in his saying, who is the head of their marketing department. The woman looked quite young, but was already able to reach such a position. She kindly greeted the new owner. Suddenly, another girl came up, who decided to introduce herself. Her name is Luo AI, and she holds the post of head of the research and development department. The girl called Xiaoluo her great boss and made a compliment regarding his appearance. Xu Guansun felt what intentions Luo AI pursues, so he asked her to be more serious and more responsible. Soon, Zhang Dunhai, who is the director of this bakery plant, also approached, an honest and entrepreneurial person. Zheng went to Mr. Xiao and shook his hand. Previously, he had already heard a lot of good reviews about the guy and was glad to meet him live. As the man expected, Xiao was a talented person with an extraordinary aura. Xu Guansun understood that there was no much flattery, but his colleague is already saying too much. After that, the man invited the new president of the company to say a few words to the leaders of the departments. But something went wrong. There were rumors between people that the strike began. She studied on the first day of the appointment of a new president, which indicated something bad. One man became interested in how exactly Xiaoluo would get out of this situation, but he did not plan to help him. Soon, Xu Guansun and all other directors led Xiaoluo to his new possessions. Now the plant was right before his eyes, and now he could get acquainted with the building. He was immediately offered to climb the second floor, as it is safer there. But for the guy, there was no need for this. He was ready to meet on the ground floor. As it turned out, it was about the workers of the plant, who went to the strike and wanted to see the new president. It was a large number of men who came out with posters and required changes in their work. At the time of Xiao, Luo realized what problem he faced face to face. The men continued to protest, and one of them suddenly felt cold. Then Xiaoluo restrainedly called himself the new president and asked the workers why they protested. They heard that Luo Fanya had changed the president, so they wanted to go to look at him together. Xiaoluo was surprised that this was the reason for such a big rebellion. So he asked if people were satisfied now. Suddenly, one of the men said that in fact they came due to the fact that their wages did not correspond to what work they do. Therefore, the workers wanted to ask for an increase in payment for their work. Like thanks to them, the company earns hundreds of millions every year, and their salary was crying like a cat. As it turned out, the financial budget of Luo Fanya became less and less, which was the biggest problem for Xiaoluo. These people obviously wanted to use a difficult position in their favor, and that strike itself was more to attract attention. One of the directors explained to the employees that their minimum salary is from 3,000 to 5,000. But now, even managers received 1,000 more. But the employees were sure that when the company had good profit, the directors have 200 or even 300,000 yuan a month. Therefore, if people now do not ask for more, then they do not know where to go later, how the company will get away from business. Xiaoluo quietly stood behind and did not know what to add, since he completely shared the sadness of these workers. To learn more about the internal problems of the company, Xiaoluo realized that he should ask a few more questions. The workers kindly agreed to the idea of a conversation, since the president of Xiao treats them quite well. The guy decided to turn to the most high-profile worker and asked specifically what he had a salary. The man did not know what exactly the new boss was going to do, but he could not lie on this question. He was a foreman, so on average his salary is 6,500 yuan. This is with difficulty earned money. Then Xiaoluo asked him to be called the size of the salary of foremen at other factories. But the employee did not know the answer to this question. But usually a person in this position should have earned 5,000 or 6,000 more. The president heard the answer and decided to interview another employee who looked younger. He doubted the answer and called the number of about 4,000 or 5,000 yuan per month. Then Xiaoluo again asked if the employee knew what the amount of the salary in other factories. After that, the young guy tried to hide his head in his gaze, but still said that at other factories, a salary of about 2,000. In other words, it turned out that the salary on Luo Fan was much larger than at other enterprises. Xiaoluo was difficult to master emotions, as he understood that most of the Protestants came out in order to get more money by lies. In order to somehow release emotions, the new president hit the wall with his fist, where a deep mark remained, after which he turned to the employee and asked for what then was not so with their salaries. Now that Luo Fan was worried about the best of times, if workers did not want to help each other, Xiao asked them at least not to throw the fireplace into his company. Therefore, after speech, he ordered to disperse and return to work. This time he was able to forgive them, but if this happens again, then he will not be responsible for the consequences. Suddenly, the same noisy worker who held the post of foreman said that the new president was simply looking for excuses, like the company earns hundreds of millions a year, therefore it cannot talk about a good attitude towards ordinary workers. The man was sure that they deserve more than a small hostel and small salaries. Zhang Dunhai could no longer endure these humiliations from subordinates and decided to intervene in the conversation. Then Xiaoluo himself said that there would be enough from him. He gave a chance to workers, but they did not want to use it. The new president called to Xu Guansun, and he was immediately ready to complete any task. The guy ordered him to dismiss all these people and no longer hire any possible positions in their company. Shui tried to reassure Xiao and said that this is not the best solution, because the dismissal of so many people destabilizes the work of the company. But Xiaoluo did not want to hear any advice and repeated his words again. The man immediately understood everything and said that he would ask someone to do this matter as soon as possible. Protestants began to beg Mr. Xiao so that he would not do this. Like, they will no longer ask for an increase in salaries. Someone among the crowd said that the new president only scares them, as if he would not fire all employees, since then the plant will completely stop. But Xiaoluo ordered the guards to immediately withdraw all the people who had just been released. The men heard the order and began to do their work, because they understood that it was better not to joke with Xiao. Meanwhile, the rumors reached Mr. Chu that Xiaoluo had not committed the best act. After all, if the factory workers are dismissed, the order will not be executed on time. Then Mr. Cho immediately asked if there was information about the person who began all this. Meanwhile, on the street near the plant, people continued to persuade the president to leave them at work. Many of them needed funds to pay loans or at least pay money for the apartment. But that same noisy foreman was still sure that on Luopan, a large order that would not be made without them. Xiaoluo decided to relax a bit after the first business, which he was able to fulfill in a new position. He went to a good restaurant, where he in advance booked the tables on himself and several colleagues. The guy came with Mr. Chu and Mr. Ji, who kindly invited to dinner. The manager of the shui was also with them. The last man told President Xiao that to dismiss 500 people at a time was a bad idea. Moreover, all employees understood their mistake. But Zhao decided that so far it was only necessary to sit and watch the performance that he began. In addition, he asked the leader what exactly the name of the person who raised a whole riot. The very loud foreman who considered himself the most intelligent among everyone was Van Tekui. Xiao Luo immediately asked the man so that later documents about his profile were on his table. The new president looked at his watch all the time and suddenly said that the time had already come. All the same workers gathered on the street, who would recently be fired, and did not even let the buses go with their crowd. Xiao told the manager Suyu to hand over the guards so that they would give the buses the opportunity to drive. Soon the road was cleared and the transport was able to move freely. Meanwhile, Van Techui climbed onto the garbage tank and turned to people. In his opinion, it was just necessary to wait for Xiao Luo to go out to them and beg to return. Suddenly, Zhana and Shan got out of the bus and was surprised how such a chicken of Podonkov has the right to threaten his brother. The guy went to the office of Xiao and said that 320 qualified workers have already arrived and will soon be ready to start work. Near the plant, there were now almost 1,000 people where old and new workers mixed. The new boss sincerely thanked his friend for his hard work, and the dismissed workers began to throw garbage into Van Tikuya, because it was precisely because of him that they were left without work. Meanwhile, Xiaolo told his small plan to Mr. Chu and suggested signing an agreement. The man thought that the guy is quite promising, so he wanted to try to give him a chance. Mr. Chu, still Trochi, talked with Xiao Luo about his plans and after that signed the necessary papers to own the company. The manager of Sui and Laoge also attended during the conclusion of a new agreement and already wanted to leave, as the matter was done. Suddenly, the manager looked out the window and noticed that something strange was happening there. He turned to Mr. Xiao to see what was happening at the entrance, and he immediately asked for the solution to the issue without beating people. Xiaolo realized what it was said to, and straightening his new suit, went to the exit from the room. He carefully went out so that he was not noticeable, thereby maintaining his confidentiality. Paul. He went to the entrance. He saw a bunch of dismissed workers there, who decided to take revenge on the organizer of this strike. Xiaoluo ordered the men to immediately calm down and behave accordingly. In addition, others had a question from where the hair came from among the crowd in linen, which also fought well. Xiaoluo became interested in the animal and asked him whether it is actually the essence of the hair. But in response, I received nothing. Meanwhile, the guards were already trying to hold Van Tishuya, who had to be taken to the hospital because his condition was quite complicated. And Zhang Dunhai decided to slightly distract the new president from troubles and offered him to show his office. Xiaoluo was not a little until that, but he thanked for his help and passed with the director. But when they reached the door, Xiao ordered the men to go to do their work, as he wanted to be alone. Now the Xiao system congratulated the user on the performance of a small target, 100 million people. Now it has been updated and unlocked by the exchange of techniques of ancient martial arts. The new task was to become a pole of martial arts in the new system. There are many enemies in this world, and only by becoming a pole of martial arts, you can discover all the ways. Suddenly, the system decided to switch to a new stage of communication with its user and showed its real form. He was a person who always thought that for a good life, it was necessary to have money. But this time, instead of money, the system handed the user a ransom coupon. She told Xiao that the martial art world developed thanks to the Shaolins, so she recommended the guy Shaolinsky Izinzin. Suddenly, the system disappeared, and a loud knock was heard into the sound of the door. But Xiao could not immediately respond to him. He still thought about the words of the system, and was surprised when he saw her real appearance. Soon, John and Shani entered the office and brought Sun Jianan, whom the guy met at the gates of the company. The man began to say that Xiao with his niece in good relations, so he should tell something. According to him, things with Luo Fan are very bad, so the guy better get rid of this burden as soon as possible. Then he admitted that a man recently died in his store, and the circumstances of death are rather strange. On that day, he, as always, cleaned on the shelves and made sure that all the goods were in his place. And then an old man came up to him, who was completely pale and could hardly speak, because his body trembled very much. Sun understood that the situation was somehow strange, and therefore he suggested that the old man sit down and relax a bit. He tried to calm him down and poured hot tea to warm him. Xiaoluo was not too interested in the details, so he asked to speak shorter and closer to the essence. Sun said that the old man clearly died of illness, and this was not connected with them. However, doctors and members of the old man were all sure that they were to blame for his death. Because of this, Jianan thought that someone wanted to destroy Luo Fan. Xiaoluo listened to everything and thanked for the information. But his uncle did not reveal his personality for Sun Wai. The man bowed and said that he would keep everything secret, but also hopes for mutual understanding. Jiang confidently smiled at his friend and said that despite all the troubles, they would all be able to decide together step by step. To begin with, Xiao decided to visit Van Tachuya, since the new president was sure that someone was standing behind him. Then, in the evening, the guys went to the Jianggan State Hospital, namely to the outpatient department. Xiu approached the guards and, according to them, Van was in the surgical chamber under the number 303. When the curtains walked along the corridor to the desired ward, someone called to Xiao Luo. It was his sister Xiao Jue, who asked his brother why he had never hung Sun Yu, who also misses him. The guy briefly explained that he now does not have time for girls in similar love novels. The girl did not arrange this answer, but she could not affect the decision of the older brother. But despite this, she still expressed her opinion regarding the fact that she wants to quickly find a wife for her only brother. But soon Jui was called to Sun, as she works in this hospital with a nurse and was supposed to bring patients of patients. However, before leaving, the girl said Xiao Luo that she would help him arrange a meeting with Sun, and they will go to the cinema. Jan also supported his sister and said Xiao that if he likes the girl, then you need to act, and not hope for accidental circumstances. But Xiaoluo replied that now he did not want to talk about it, and offered to go to the Wang Tachuya ward as soon as possible. Soon the guys together found the desired ward, in which the body lay completely crossed by medical bandages. Xiu looked at this picture and ordered Zhan and the Shan to wake him. The wounded man only visible his eyes. He could not move a single part of his body since it was very disfigured. Then Zhan turned to the worker and said that if he dared to go against his brother, now they will torment him. After these words, the guy began to touch the different corners of the man's body with his hands, which brought him severe pain. Van Takuya had tears in his eyes, but he could not even scream, since his mouth was also rewound. Then Xiao asked his colleague to stop mocking the sick and decided to talk to him. The man tried to ask through the bandages what they got to do with him. Xiaoluo leaned closer to Van and ordered him to tell him who told him to arrange a strike. Because otherwise, when Zhao does not hear an answer, he will make a former worker died in this hospital. After such threats, the man agreed to tell everything, if only he was not killed and no longer mocked him. Then he began to tell that one stranger gave him 20,000 yuan and asked to do it. And he also said that in the case when everything works out, he will be arranged to work in Vila. However, unfortunately, Van Takui did not know this person at all, and even repented to the president of Xiao in his words. After what he heard, Xiaoluo turned around and went to the exit, and Zhang and Shan was surprised at such a reaction. He went to his comrade and asked if he would really believe the word to Van. Like only thanks to torture you can find out the truth. She replied that this was a hospital, not a camera of bullying. In addition, he was sure that the worker did not lie to him. Jan and Shan did not appreciate how much his friend became right, but could not do anything. All the time, a stranger was watching the hospital from the corner of the hospital. He waited until the young men go to the parking lot and get into his car to fulfill his plan. As it turned out, that fat man was not alone, and when one of them moved, Xiao immediately heard extraneous sounds. However, in a matter of seconds, a sharp knife turned out to be near the neck of the new president, and behind him was a criminal. But Zhao now owned good techniques of combat thoughts, and he managed to quickly intercept the stranger's hand. Then he threw him to his back and from there, holding only by the hand, threw him away, not the floor. And for his own safety, he took a knife from the thief, and now he could use it against his enemy. Suddenly, he heard mercy that he had to stop in order to preserve the life of his brother. When Xiao returned, he saw a fat man who held Zhanya by the hands, like a suspended rabbit. The man even decided to introduce himself and called himself as Xiao A, after which he added that this is the last day of his comrades. However, Xiao asked her husband to release Zhenya, since only he himself was all responsible. The man laughed at how Xiaoluo was right and listened to his words. Then Xiaoyi threw in Shan, like some kind of thing, and the guy flew with his whole body right on Xiaoluo. The comrade managed to catch the body of a friend who looked lifeless, but was simply unconscious. But suddenly, at that moment when Zhanya's body touched the body of Xiao, the latter felt a large amount of strong blow in the back. Xiaoe began to rejoice from what he saw. They say he did not calculate the strength, but he was counting on such a face. Xiaoluo began to bleed, so carefully laid Zhan and Shan to the ground to gather strength. After that, the new president recovered a little and rushed directly to the fat man to use new techniques on him. But surprisingly for him, the guy hit the air, and not on the head of the enemy. And for some reason, he felt pain. Then Xiao A laughed. They say Xiao Luo had already spent all his energy on women. Since his blow was very weak, Xiao Luo seemed to be in a dream and could not understand why his blows were so insignificant. Because before it had never happened before, in his eyes, Xiao Yi resembled a real demon who seemed to burn, and his eyes were empty and white. Then the enemy said that the Xiao is all an ordinary amateur who is not able to use internal skills, and his blows resembled the movements of ordinary courtyards who decided to wave his fists. Xiao Luo could not understand how Xiao Yi hit him, so he thought about his internal skills, which were incredibly strong. Then the guy turned to the system and exchanged the ransom coupon, for which he received Izin Jing. Now Xiao also had a great power in his hands. Meanwhile, Xiao proposed the following conditions. If that opal withstands his 3 blows, then the man will let him go home. Xiao Luo gathered his strength and confidently got to his feet. Now he agreed to the proposal heard. At that moment, the fat man accumulated his own energy and used the crown blow of the double fist, destroying the hearing. Xiao Luo felt like a wave of cold water bypassing him, and he could confidently stand on his feet. Then his internal energy and energy of the Xiao collided in the air, forming a strong explosion. People around began to scream in pain in his ears, but Xiao Luo continued to stand motionlessly and told the man that he did not feel anything. The fat man thought about whether the guy really hid his real inner strength, but decided to use another trick against him anyway. This time it was his skill for fried rabbit meat, and the body of Xiao A began to glow again. At that moment, the body of Xiao Luo began to radiate protective energy, which could also become his attack. The guy could not correctly control internal skills, so a strong hand had formed from his flow of energy. Then the young man apologized that he could not control the force yet, and this could lead to unknown consequences. Xiao was angry and said that Xiao Luo himself forced him to do this and use Kalin, destroying the mountains. The fat man gradually lost his strength, but made every effort to destroy the guy. A real dragon began to form from his stream of power, which could easily absorb anything in this world. But suddenly his energy began to dissipate in the air under the influence of the energy of Xiao Luo. Then the man was terribly scared because he saw the ruler of Van Mina in front of him. In fact, the very powerful ruler formed from the energy of Xiao Luo, which was unrealistic to win. Xiao Yi could not believe that the guy so quickly achieved success in the cultivation of Izinjin. In his opinion, it was impossible to have such a level of cultivation at a young age. Xiao Luo felt that now the control of the situation in his hands, and told the man that he had accepted 3 of his blows and successfully withstood them. And now it was his turn to introduce himself, and he called his name. Only after that he added that he was the person who would destroy him. Then the young man understood how much the internal force was really useful. But Zhana still continued to lie nearby unconscious. Meanwhile, the real enemy of Xiao Luo was thinking about the fact that everything was planned, but somewhere there was a lack of data. He hosted the same gene that the casino owned. He knew how to fix everything and persuaded the third master to listen to him. The man decided to give him a chance since any information about Xiao was now needed. Jen said that when Luo came to his casino, there was a girl with him. Her name is Sun Yu, and they are quite close. Then her husband realized that it was necessary to arrange the abduction of that girl and thought that this was really a good idea. And the gene itself began to rejoice that he would still be able to survive and leave his business. But as it turned out, he was very mistaken, and the third pan said that Gina was expelled from the family. Meanwhile, Sun Yu met with Xiao Zui near the hospital, in which the sister of Xiao Luo worked. The girl could not believe that she would still be able to see a guy, and she began to get nervous in anticipation of a date. She knew that they would go to the cinema and tried to choose what to put on her. The first idea was to make an image with a skirt, but Xiao Zui reassured the girl by the fact that her brother is absolutely on clothes, so you cannot worry about this. Most of their conversations, Sun Yu only talked about what exactly their date represents. Xiao Zui was even surprised that someone could go crazy from her brother so much, because she had not known about the opinions of girls about him before. While the girls walked together, they were constantly tracking, and the guy who did this has already transmitted all the information to the management. Meanwhile, Sun Yu was driving home and wrote a message to Xiao Luo that she would wait for him by the stairs on Saturday morning, and offered to go shopping together. The girl was incredibly glad that she would be able to arrange a joint shopping and she will be able to choose the clothes that will like Xiao, and at that time, Xiao Luo was able to finish the fight and taking John and Shan, he returned home. The latter still felt bad, Suddenly, a notification came to the phone of the new president and he reluctantly decided to see him. It was SMS from Sun Yu, but when the guy read his content, he was only more upset. Store trips for him were worse torture, moreover, when he has such problems with business. But in order to get distracted, Xiao has so far left his friend, and he himself went in search of the man who sent those men near the hospital. And Zhenya he asked to go to bed early, but the guy had to talk with one girl. When Xiao left the room and was left alone, he felt devastated, as if there was nothing inside. Then the system appeared and reported that the user managed to score 127 points for the adventure. But he will not be able to exchange such a number of points for something worthwhile. But Xiao was more interested in the question of whether there was something like that, so that he would be able to collect information. Then the system found bought for an exchange, which cost 120 points. And for Xiao, he was ready to give him even at a discount of 50%. Xiaolo took a green piece of paper in his hands and asked how exactly he needed to use it. The system began to be angry because of the stupid questions of the user, because first you need to confirm the exchange. The man from the system almost exploded with anger, since he was difficult to control emotions. However, Zhao at that moment was not up to emotional conversations and he calmly confirmed the exchange. Its new ability allows you to create a separate creation within itself, which was a rather interesting skill. The system said that the exchange was successful, and the user is a professional in the network periphery. With each meeting with the system, it seemed even more strange for Xiao, but there was no other option. Therefore, starting the launch of the system load, the guy decided to check exactly how his new skill works. Then he sat down at the computer and each time before using something new, hesitated a little, because it is not known what could happen. But this time he quickly moved to the focus of the mountain, which was an integral part of the search for information. And then he quickly got into the world of the internet, where he could finally find out who really stands behind all the bandits that are found in his way. The next step was digital scanning. Now Xiao had access to any information that was online. Immediately before him appeared a monitor on which he could read the documents. There he learned that that fat man of Xiaoen belongs to the Dragon Gang, the group of the city of Jiang. Previously, the guy had already heard about her, especially with his own eyes. I saw the very dragon that appeared from the energy of a man. These dragons possessed incredible power, and without making efforts could destroy everything in their path. From them, no one had a single chance of defense, except for those who owned the cultivation of the highest level. It all resembled a hacker attack that looked quite interesting. Meanwhile, in the main headquarters of the NSA, the city of Siahai, the workers immediately saw the changes. They informed the leadership that their firewall was faced with an attack and the enemy tried to get around it. According to the calculations of professionals, the enemy could break through the first layer of protection in a few minutes. Then, the head of the company ordered immediately to activate the second and third layer of protection and pay special attention to monitoring IP. One of the workers had a proposal to contact Chu Yue to report to her everything. But the man said that it is better to do this because the girl is already waiting for their failure to get freedom of action. As it turned out, the girl was a professional hacker, and this attack was her hand. She tried to destroy NSA software monkeys as soon as possible to destroy them and get power. At that time, in the virtual world, Saoluo watched the attack of dragons trying to break through the defense. Then he saw the portal and realized that this attack came from another country. Then, in the virtual world, the image of Chu Yue appeared, who was there as a criminal and wanted to destroy everything around. Then, at the main headquarters of the NSA, the director ordered the group to report to him about the current situation. Currently, there were attacks from a large number of addresses on their network, and it was noticeable that Chu Yue also intervened. The girl was looking for a cluster of her native garbage in the form of dragons and waited for her to attack her. She was confident in her abilities and destroyed the creatures that prevented her from moving on. She was not afraid to receive injuries, as she was in golden armor, protecting her body. The girl easily destroyed the dragons, which for others seemed invincible creatures. She even used the radiance of a lunar attack that could burn everything in its path. From the attack, the dragons turned into network dust, which disappeared in the air. The girl was incredibly satisfied with her work, and she had very little to finish her mission. Suddenly, her image on the internet began to disappear, and there was no reason. But as it turned out, in the real world, the Chu Yue computer burned from overload to the system. In the main office, it was reported that the hacker of Chu Yue successfully prevented the attack of enemy hackers. Xiaoluo continued to observe from the side and thought that the battle in the digital world was really interesting. However, he already spent too much effort, so he had to return to the matter rather. Through Wednesday, he managed to see that gang of the dragon was engaged in any business, and no one could stop her. The guy managed to see the official cooperation between Huahai groups and the Lunchi Enterprise. Suddenly, the main office was reported that an attack began on their Wednesday simultaneously from several countries. Now the main ordered to turn to Chu Yue and everyone else is ready to support her. Now the workers should have been ready to also physically disconnect from the network at any time and prevent the enemy from getting to the information they needed. Xiaoluo saw dragons who had no end to the digital world. Therefore, he decided to spend a little his time and also defend. Soon, employees of the NSA General Staff reported to the leader that an unknown hacker established a dynamic firewall, which was written in a strange language. The man smoked all the time as he was very nervous and asked the employee how much that defense would be enough. The guy analyzed the installation of Firewall and realized that he would be simple for about 5 years. Presumably, it will take about 5 years to find the code. Besides, information was left there. Namely, those who will annoy the Chinese people will meet with serious consequences. Now, the director ordered the person who did this, and by any means to invite him to NSA. Meanwhile, Xiaoluo returned to real life and reflected on the groups of Huahai and Lunben. Then he turned to a system that had no desire to work now, but she had no choice. The guy was interested in the question of whether there is any opportunity to quickly earn a lot of points. The system joked that the guy needs to spend the night with Su Li, who was the most famous star, but Xiao refused. The real optional task was the following. The guy needed to restore the reputation of Luo Fanya within 3 months, and if successful, he will receive 30,000 points. In the event of a loss of the user, 3 skills will be cancelled, and Xiaoluo agreed to this task. Having finished the case with the collection of information, Xiao went to Yes the Shan and said that the next day they would go together. The comrade was interested in driving together and solving things, so he asked where exactly they would go. She said that they would need to meet with a reporter who was hearing Luo Fan. The next day, Zhang was already sitting behind the wheel. Now he was like a personal driver of the company's president. Meanwhile, Xiao called his sister and informed her that recently she and Sun Yu was surveillance. And now the girls need to walk only in crowded places. The brother also asked to convey Xiao Jue to warn Sun so that she was careful. Then Zhang stood in a conversation and told a comrade that it would be better if he personally did it. But Zhao did not want to talk about it now. Suddenly, during their trip, but Shang saw a man on a motorcycle that began to go to them too closely. The stranger was in a helmet and increasingly increased the speed of his transport, which became more dangerous. But in the end, he could not continue to control the motorcycle, and the wheels also began to bring down. As a result, the driver fell from his transport and hit his back against an iron pillar. The man was a foreigner and shouted something in English. Suddenly, he took out a pistol from his pocket and directed him forward. Ahead of him was just a car in which Xiaoluo was sitting, and he tried to get into him. People around began to run away from the sounds of shots, and someone even called the police. Zhang was very frightened when he saw that the weapon was instructed to him as well. Xiaoluo reassured his comrade with the words that since he was near, then the danger would pass and they will remain alive. But suddenly, the same motorcyclist climbed into the car and ordered Zhanya to go, because otherwise he would shoot everyone. He held the weapon right at the head and the shan, and Xiao was surprised at such confidence. But soon he saw a grenade in the hands of the terrorist, so he realized that it was better not to joke and asked his friend to go. The man inside ordered the guy to go as quickly as possible and not pay attention to the red light. Then he took out a grenade and said that if the police catch up with them, they would all fly into the air together. The man was angry due to the fact that Zhang was not quickly enough and began to threaten again. Then the guy pressed the gas pedal as much as possible and carried the car forward. And at this time, Xiao decided to talk with the criminal and asked him, was that hired killer? He was right, because after this question, the man instructed him weapons and ordered him to shut up. Like his hand can accidentally twitch and then Xiao will instantly die. He instructed the weapon closer to the head of the new president to inspire fear him. After that, the offender suddenly pressed the trigger and the bullet quickly flew out, barely hitting the cheek of Xiaoluo, from which the blood began to go a little. But the guy, even after the injury, sat motionless, and with proud eyes watched the further actions of the terrorist. His gaze was concentrated, and thereby he showed the lack of fear in his head. The mercenary killer laughed and said that Xiao was behaving cool, as if he was really not afraid. Then the man quickly turned to the window and began to shoot in different directions so that the police stopped following him. He managed to get into the cars that were driving next to their car, after which the killer suggested that Xiao join the Blackwater with him. And the guy replied that he first got out of this situation, and then they will be able to talk. While they were traveling, a little girl appeared on the road who was traveling on a bicycle. Zhang was frightened when he saw her because he did not want to risk the life of a little one. He had to quickly turn the steering wheel and press the brake to leave it alive. Then the guy temporarily lost control of the car and she sharply turned to the side. This was the perfect moment for Xiao Luo, who was just waiting for the opportunity to neutralize the criminal. The guy managed to rush at the killer and grab his hand, which is why he felt severe pain. Further, Xiao found the right point on the tendons, because of which the hand of the offender in itself unclenched. Then a grenade fell out of it, which he all the time threatened the guys in the car. However, his gun was in the other hand, and he could still shoot someone. Realizing that he still has a weapon, the killer was sure that he would be able to survive and instructed the gun on Xiao. But the guy was more agile and grabbing the criminal's hand, instructed the trunk to his head, and then shot. Xiao apologized to Zhang and said that now they would have to wash the car inside because the entire salon is in the blood. Soon the guys stopped the car and the police came to them. The body of the criminal was taken by an ambulance and took him immediately to the morgue. The policeman told Xiaoluo that he should go to the police department with him and testify. The policeman was surprised because for the first time he saw a person who behaved so calmly after the murder and attack. In the evening, the comrades were already going home from the site, and yes, Shang still could not check that Xiao had killed the criminal with his own hands. Then Xiaoluo warned the guy that given their work, now this could happen quite often. And to the question, is it scary to him? But Shang answered that he would lie if he had denied it, but he was no longer going to retreat. Soon the guys returned home, and while Xiao was resting, his phone began to call suddenly. It was an unknown number, and the guy hesitated whether to answer him. However, this could concern the work and he picked up the phone. But along that line, they told him that the girl of Xiaoluo hostages, as it turned out, it was about Sun Yu. The girl was closed in an unknown room, which resembled an abandoned building. She was connected, and the offender nearby said Xiao, if he wants her to remain alive, he should come to the warehouse next evening. A prerequisite was that Xiaoluo would come alone, otherwise the consequences would be deplorable. Sun Yu managed to remove the bandage from the mouth, and she ordered her brother Xiao to come, because she knew that in any case they wanted to kill him. The guy was shocked. He just began to relax from the past attack, as he was now beginning to threaten the lives of other people. But he acted prudently and tried not to panic. Xiao was confident in his own abilities and that he could stand up for himself. Therefore, the day after lunch, he came to the warehouse in a western suburb. That day it was heavy and the weather deteriorated. When Xiao went to the abandoned building, he called the same number and said that he was already on the spot. The criminal thought that the guy would not come, but said that he would send someone to be carried out. Xiaoluo stood out among everything around that abandoned warehouse. He had a bright umbrella, which served at least something bright on such a day. While the guy stood and waited, one of the criminals, who had a knife behind his back, approached him. He led Xiao to the iron door and indicated where exactly to go. Xiaoluo was not afraid to go into the room, so his steps were rather confident. When he entered the building, it was completely empty and without any lighting, so nothing was visible. Suddenly, a bright lantern began to shine into his eyes, which seemed to blind a man. Ahead of the lantern was a man who was delighted with the appearance of their main character. As for Sun Yu, she was blindfolded because it was not desirable for children to see this. He ordered the girl to play with him in the game, after which he may let her go. Xiaoluo clearly told the criminal that he would immediately let the girl go, and they would talk like men. But the killer took out the knife and ordered the guy to stand still, like he is a shy person and can accidentally wound Sun. But suddenly, a little blood appeared on the lady of the knife, and he said that it seems to have already touched the girl. She was not going to endure mockery of him and his girlfriend, so he decided to turn to the system. He called her, and she began to joke, as if she did not know what they wanted from her. Therefore, Xiao directly said that he needed help, and understood that he would have to pay well for it. Meanwhile, the criminal turned to Xiao and asked if the guy was going to listen to his instructions. So far, Xiao received the necessary help from the system. He decided to keep the situation under control and said that he would be obedient. After this answer, Sun Yu began to cry and told the young man to leave her and run away as soon as possible. Then the killer ordered her to shut up and not to behave like a heroine if he wants new scars to not appear on her face. Xiaoluo intervened in the conversation and said that he had already promised to obey. Therefore, the criminal must release the girl, The killer continued to keep the knife at the hostage and ordered other men to bring us special props on the stage. Soon 2 people with iron buckets came in which there were hot stones. They poured them in the shape of a path that passed between Xiao and the connected Sun Y. The killer looked at Luo and said with a smile that he began to crawl along this path, and since the guy promised to obediently fulfill all the orders, he immediately became knees on the stones. After that, he put his bare hands to the burning floor from which smoke began to go, the killer joked, saying that it began to smell of fried meat. Xiao did not make a single sound, but suddenly, near him, one of the men took out a sharp knife and waved to the guy. After that, he severely cut the young man's hand and left a deep wound on her. Sun Yu heard suspicious sounds and began to panic. She tried to shout to Xiao to run away. However, the thief immediately approached the girl and ordered her to shut up, closing his mouth with his hand. Then he touched the bandages in her eyes and said that now the time came and the main actress to go on stage. He sharply tore the bandage from his eyes and showed Sun Yu her beloved Xiao Luo, who is unbearably suffering from torture. The girl began to cry and scream from what she saw. She wanted to protect the guy with her own life. The face of Xiao Luo was red, because he even put his head on hot stones that injured the skin with one touch. His skin was glowing and bleeding. Besides, the wound on the arm from the knife was very difficult. Then the criminal turned to Sun and invited her to arrange a real show for her lover. However, Sun could no longer endure these bullying, and with her bare hands and drank a sharp knife near her neck. At that moment, a distraught thug stuck a knife into the body of Sun in front of the main character, which in the meantime continued to paint painfully on red-hot coals. The young master was shocked by such a sudden turn because he believed that the killer would bluff. A moment later, the young cultivator jumped to his feet and shouted with an angry that they would all die. The surprised bandit was at a loss, as he believed that the guy had already burned on the charcoal. She saw how the body of Yu collapsed to the ground and a teenager fell into a rage. In this connection, Luo rushed towards the Glorirezer to finally kill him. An unknown mercenary prepared for a clash, dark magic smoke in his hand, after which he grabbed Xiao and knocked him to the ground. The guy realized that the killer was actually strong. However, after a couple of seconds, the body of Luo shone with a bright light. It seemed that the young man was mad. Finally, the bandit realized that in fact he took advantage of the saturation of internal energy. Angry and burning in fire, Xiao once again rushed to the attack. The thug, in turn, blurring in a smile, noticed that he was crazy. Then he grabbed the teenager by the shoulders with a lightning-fast movement, intending to tear his hands to him. The self-confident Luo only grinned, looking at the extremely naive killer. Then, he grabbed his hands and said that he had signed a death sentence for himself because he touched the girl. A moment later, Xiao literally crushed his wrists. The maniac shouted loudly with unbearable pain, at the same time applying his crushing blows to the body of a crazy bandit. As a result, he collapsed to the ground, realizing that for him this is the end. Then the main character instantly ran to the bloodied body Sun. The young master did not know whether the girl was alive, which was about what he asked the system. Artificial intelligence replied that the young cultivator radiates Izinzin and could feel her pulse. By adding that her heart is still beaten and it is necessary to deliver to the hospital as soon as possible, Luo understood that he could not lose a minute and hurried to pull out the girl. Xiu grabbed her in his arms and headed for the exit to quickly take her to the hospital. Leaving the bloody trail, the young lady never came into consciousness. It was necessary to act quickly, and the guy decided to call his friend. It did not subside pouring rain on the street. Naturally, Shan agreed to come to the warehouses that they were in a western suburb. In anticipation of Zhang, Luo looked at the exhausted girl, hoping that she would survive. At the same time, the teenager promised himself that if she really gets better, he would marry her. By that time, the rain stopped and the sun's rays began to cut through in the sky. A few minutes later, Shan arrived and said that he arrived as soon as he could. After that, Xiao gently laid Sun in the back seat and got into the car. The young man held her head to normalize blood circulation. Then he ordered a friend to go to the hospital as soon as possible. Zhang immediately set off. As soon as they arrived in the hospital, Luo picked up the girl and asked to help him. The frightened Shan closed the car and hurried to a friend, realizing that he again needed to wash the car. Xiu ran into the hospital and sat down with the South in the lobby, while Zhang called the doctors to help. A moment later, and brought the gurney. After him, the doctors of the hospital came running. Luo carefully put Sun on a gurney and called on the hospital employees to help her. One of the doctors noticed that the girl's condition is stable, and they will try to do everything possible to put her on her feet. The teenager literally begged to save her and said that she was very dear to him. Suddenly, he felt ill, and ultimately the guy lost consciousness. But yes, Shan timely caught the young man and put on the couch in the corridor. Xiao did not understand what was happening to him and why his consciousness suddenly clouded. The last thing he managed to see was Sun's bloodied body, which never came to his senses. After a certain time, the main character came into consciousness in the ward and immediately thought about why. What he asked next to the sitting Zhang, but he replied that his sister was watching her. At this moment, a police officer presented her certificate Luo and said that her name is Qianlin. Ji Yu urged the young master to cooperate with the investigation to deal with the murder in a warehouse in a western suburb. Shan noticed that the officer was in the ward all the time and waited for him to wake up. Lin urgently recommended that Zhao follow her to the police station and help in the investigation. Meanwhile, the worried sister of the young cultivator was in the sun chamber. Suddenly, Zhu said that if she did not wake up, then she would no longer see her brother, adding that the doctor said if within 2 days she does not recover, he could fall into a coma. At that moment, Luo suddenly entered the ward and asked how Yu feels, and she sadly said that in the worst case, her vegetative state awaits her if she does not wake up in time. The teenager slowly moved towards Sun and gently stroked her hair. Then he said that she was the first girl who was ready to die for him, and he would marry her. Suddenly, Yu came into consciousness and hit the guy, then shouted loudly. It was amazing, but the girl did not recognize her savior in him, asking who he was. Xiao, in turn, was struck by this result of the injury of the young lady. Zhu decided to calm her brother and said that the doctor warned of a temporary loss of memory. The frightened son began to ask how she ended up in the hospital and why her brother came so close to her. The dumbfounded Luo headed for the exit and asked his sister to go out to the corridor with him. Yu asked where she went. The girl replied that she would talk to her brother and return. As soon as the Zhao left the ward of the Yu, he found a prefixed police officer. Zian Lin, as before, asked him to go to the police station with her. However, the worried Zhu said that he would not go anywhere with her, and was not to blame for anything. Luo tried to calm his sister and said that he would just talk to the investigator and that's it. Then the guy turned to the officer of GU and asked him to provide him with another couple of minutes. The girl was extremely reluctant to answer positively and began to wait again in the corridor. Suddenly, Xiao took a side and asked not to tell Sun about him. Zhu did not understand why he needed it, but the teenager again asked her to not let him remember him. Then the saddened sister agreed to fulfill his request. She was painful to hear this from her brother. After that, the young man went to the hated line, which was waiting for him near the chamber. Luo perfectly understood that Sun would always be in danger with him, and he only wanted her good. Xiao went to the embittered Gu and also indifferently tired of her gaze. Then, passing by, he urged her to go to the department in order to discuss the current situation. On the way, sad Luo thought only about one thing, that the memories of him would remain deep in the memory of Yu. The artificial intelligence of the protagonist at that time was saddened by one disappointing fact for him. After all, he perfectly understood that most likely the young master would go to Sun, but not. At that moment, an extremely loud system alarm clock suddenly rang. So, the time has come to collect debts. Of course, this concerned the young cultivator. However, artificial intelligence decided to give the opportunity to not think about it at such a moment and translated the alarm. Luo, in turn, was successfully delivered to the main police department of Zhangchen, where Lin asked the guy if he denied the fact that he went to a warehouse in a western suburb yesterday morning. The teenager answered positively, because it was really stupid to deny. Then the investigator asked the young man why he went there. Xiao answered absolutely calmly to save Sun, as she was in danger. Jiyu asked again whether Li Luo admitted that it was he who committed all the murders in the warehouse. This time, the guy answered negatively, which naturally infuriated Chen, who began to resent about this and say that he should admit, adding that thereby he now violates the law and it can cost him expensive. However, the young master continued to adhere to his position and was not going to retreat from it. At the same time, Xiao said that initially Lin called him to help the investigation. The angry Gu again reminded him that the consequences of his actions would be deplorable. Luo again said that he really did nothing and did not understand what she was talking about. The girl suddenly jumped up and said that even Yunxun would not help him. The young man urged her to express herself clearer, since he did not understand what was talking about and what she was hinting at. The Malza, shocked by such impudence, the police officer immediately grabbed him by the shirt. Speaking about the fact that he had not crossed the road to those people, Xiao still pretended as if he did not understand what she was talking about. Then Xianlin said that if he helps the investigation, they will try to find evidence of his innocence. And that for him, this is a great opportunity to avoid punishment and continue to live calmly. But Luo demanded that a law enforcement officer remove his hand. Of course, Lin Jiu did not even think of doing this, from which she began to behave even more aggressively. As a result, she only provoked a teenager, and he beat off her hand. Then he went to the exit and said that he was doing, and moreover, the police are unlikely to restore justice. The dumbfounded Chen ran out to the corridor, urging him to return immediately. But Xiao did not stop saying that until he gets victory, he could not stop at anything. The protagonist called Shan and said that he should rest for a couple of days, because he will soon need his help with the plywood. Zhang, in turn, urged the young master not to do stupid things, because Sun still could not recover. However, the young cultivator assured him that everything is under control and he would just need help. Yes, he felt that Zhao had something to talk about and he asked to share his anxiety with him. But Luo still claimed that nothing terrible happened and nothing to worry about. Then the guy hung up and plunged into the thought process. The teenager wanted only one, to deal with the gangster grouping of the dragon. Suddenly, artificial intelligence called him. The young man turned around and saw the old man, who decided to remind him that today is the 19th of May and it is necessary to pay off the debt. Shio urged him to speak clearer, and the program immediately highlighted him a certain window, where it was written about a debt of 20,000 points, and in case of non-payment, the system could take his body. Going into the portal, the old man noticed that he was unnecessarily his body, but these are the rules. Luo began to understand that he needed to hurry and deal with the gang. But at first it was necessary to visit the company. After a certain time, Xiao came to the corporation to meet with Shub, where a guard met him at the entrance and greeted his president. The guy asked whether Guansun was in the company. The employee replied that he had recently left someone. The teenager understood that he could take someone with him, but at the moment he could only help him. In connection with which Luo asked where G-Man, the guard suddenly thought, as if remembered whether he had seen her or not. However, his long silence seemed to the young master rather suspicious. A moment later, a young lady came to them and greeted the director. A surprised employee, along with Xiao, turned around and saw a smiling Heman. The girl, in turn, asked what President Luo wanted. Then the guy asked her if she accidentally knew Chen Jianbei. Li replied that earlier she was responsible for contacting him, but this person was extremely unreasonable. Xiao asked her to take him to him, because he needed to talk to him. Subsequently, the girl volunteered to lift Luo in her chic car. A few minutes later, they successfully arrived at the place and got out of the car. G-Man pointed to the basketball court and stated that he was there. The young director urged her to draw up a company for him and go to Chen, which at that time was extremely passionate about the game of basketball with his friends. It seemed that nothing foreshadowed trouble and Xiao would really just talk to him. But when Jianbai threw the ball into the basket, the main character decided to surprise everyone. The young master literally soared into the height, and catching the ball, he sent him to the ring. Naturally, Chen did not expect such a turn, and was extremely dissatisfied with the actions of the guy. The young cultivator, in turn, broke into a smile and kept confident enough. The shocked Heman did not understand why he was doing this because they can be beaten. Jianbai instantly began to indignant about this and stated that he was preventing them from playing. Xiao ordered him not to arrange a circus, but to talk in a calm atmosphere, adding that he is the new president of the company Luo Fan and he has a dealing with him. Chen asked what he wanted, suggesting that the newly made director would invite him to poison someone. Luo noticed that he gives him the opportunity to clear the good name of the corporation. Bai asked how much he would pay him for this, but Xiao said that this was a favor and he would not receive anything. In response, the guy laughed and said that he was excessively funny and naive. Then they again began to play basketball, not paying attention to Luo, which naturally could not leave everything so and decided to act more harshly. But Heman urged the director not to do stupid things and not to contact these people. At this moment, the young master noticed a cart with a huge number of basketballs. And when Li thought that everything was over and they would finally go back to the company, she saw an angry president who grabbed one of the balls and went to Chen. As a result, Xiao made a strong throw of the ball towards Jianbei. A moment later, the ball flew into the head of a teenager with great speed. Li, in turn, suggested that this would all end badly, and Luo would definitely be beaten down. The dumbfounded Bai shouted at that time who dared to throw the ball into it. Smiling and all the same self, confident Xiao raised his hand up, making it clear that he would not leave so simply. The angry Chen immediately ran to him and began to insult him in every way. Suddenly, Jianbai grabbed Luo by the shirt and continued angry insults. Then the confident Xiao said that he just wanted to talk to him. The perplexed guy menacingly stated that he was not going to talk to him. Then he tried to hit the new president of the company, but he could not do this, because Luo grabbed his fist in a timely manner and gradually squeezed him, thereby urging him to change his mind. But even in this position, Jianbai remained on his own and said that he would not restore what he himself destroyed. At this moment, the protagonist quietly included the recorder in the pants pocket. Then he asked if he did not deny that all the rumors of Fan's company, this was his business and invention. Chen said that he could write what he would want about, and if the corporation is road, he would better apologize to him. At the same time, he can write that all their employees are mortally ill and even mix poison in bread. Shocked, Jimin said that it was slander and he would not dare to do this. Bai said that before reporters their company is nothing, and no one can help them. But if he agrees to dinner with him, he will think about the offer of Zhao. This made fun of all Jianbei's near friends and thought that this was really a good idea. The dumbfounded maid stated menacingly that she would never agree to this in her life, but Chen added that he always dreamed of a woman like her. Besides, the name of the corporation will be cleared of dirt. Ji naturally stood on her and did not agree to such conditions. At this moment, the young master said that he got a very good remark. Then he turned on the record on the voice recorder, where everything was said by Jianbai. An embittered teenager said that he would not be able to do anything. Since they now beat him to death, Chan's friends immediately approached him. Calm Luo urged Heman to file a lawsuit against Bai, so that he was punished for undermining the company's reputation. Of course, the girl agreed, realizing that the new director was enough insidious personality. Meanwhile, a crowd of teenagers was already surrounded by Xiao, trying to intimidate him. Without thinking twice, the young man struck a crushing force blow to Jianbei in the face. Chan's friends were shocked by such a turn of events and froze in place. At that moment, Bai literally flew into the fence of the basketball court. However, no one dared to attack the ferocious Luo, who really inspired fear. Li, in turn, was struck by the actions of the president and silently stood aloof. Suddenly, Xiao spent all the gang members with a menacing look and asked who wants to intercede for Zhang. Naturally, there were no people who wanted to, and everything in a characteristic way twisted their heads. Then Luo ordered them to disperse, which in the final result they did. The basketball court after seconds was empty, and only the director remained with the admired Bai Ji. A contented girl followed him, thinking that he was simply incredible. Suddenly the guy stopped and Main crashed into him, after which she immediately apologized. She ordered her tomorrow to file a lawsuit against Jiangyi and seriously do this case. Of course, the young lady agreed and broke into a smile. Luo hastened to leave the sports ground. Li did not notice how the courageous and charming newly made director had not before. The protagonist walked along the streets of the city and thought that soon the company's reputation would be restored. And as soon as Fan gets to his feet, he will pass the furrow of the reign of Shanu, and then he will take the scrap from the ban. At this moment, a young phone suddenly rang, a mobile phone. The young cultivator immediately answered the call. It was a vice president, who talked about the fact that the corporation Fouquet wants to terminate the contract with them. This really was a big problem for Luo Fan. However, Xiao did not understand what specifically was talking about and asked Guangsun. Sui said that Fouquet has one of the 500 best processing plants in the world, and for unknown reasons they did not update the contract with them. The director ordered him to collect all the chapters tomorrow. Then he thought that Guan himself could be a traitor to the corporation. Soon the young master went home to rest in order to prepare for the tomorrow's meeting. The next day, everyone was assembled and the young president began the meeting. Zhu, in turn, urged him not to sue Jianbei, since, in his opinion, this could lead to the collapse of the company. But Luo said that if they do not cleanse the honest name of the corporation, then the collapse is inevitable. Then he asked Guangsun, did he really decide to get a job? The dumbfounded Song replied that he did not dare to think about this, and was always loyal to the company. Then he transferred the claim to the marketing department in the person of Li, and demanded explanations from her. Jimin said that under the contract they must pay a penalty of 10 million, but by mid-autumn the validity of the contract has expired. Lighted Luo asked her why she did not sign a new contract in advance. The girl pleaded guilty, but Qi unexpectedly stood up for her and said that Fouquet had arrived immorally and there was no guilt of men. Luo immediately ordered Suyu to organize him a meeting with the head of their corporation, adding that at the meeting they will be present with Qi and Guan. So you need to come up with how to return the trust. After some time, they arrived on the golf field in a polish, where a meeting with Zhang was supposed to take place. Xiao ordered Lu to take a contract with him and follow him to President Fouquet. Sui urged all the chapters to be more careful with Honda, since one wrong step and you can forget about the contract. Zhang, in turn, busily sat in a chair in the middle of the golf field. Where pretty girls surrounded him, he noted that he had a good job. Guangsun demanded her to shut up, because if he hears, he would completely refuse to talk to them. At that moment, Luo approached them and asked, "Was that the same Honda?" Sui was shocked by this behavior of his head, because in such cases it was impossible to turn by name. And Li only admired the confidence of the boss, realizing how cool he was. A moment later, the main character approached Zhang and greeted him. But Honda ignored him and defiantly floundered on a deck chair, then asked for grapes. One of his servants immediately fed his berry. The young master boiled with anger. He extremely did not like this behavior of such a young and already overly impudent head of Fuke. Shui decided to rectify the situation and asked for forgiveness from Zhang for being late. Honda, in turn, spat out the bone towards the young cultivator, after which Guangsun introduced him the current president of the Luo Corporation. Xiao held out his hand to him to show respect in this way, but Zhang ignored him again. Then he said that their new director is extremely young and inexperienced, so their decline is not surprising. Then Qi said that Luo held out his hand, and he showed disrespect for him. Sui instantly reassured the girl and urged her not to intervene in the conversation between the chapters. However, the girl once again said that it was tactlessly on his part. Honda looked with his indifferent look at her and said that she could suffer because of her statements. She replied that while he was her boss, he would not allow her to harm anyone. Realizing that in fact this person can think something bad, Zhang smiled and noticed that it just seemed to him so much. Then he asked why they asked for a meeting. Then Luo asked why he decided to break the contract with them. After 3 years of successful cooperation, Honda replied that he worked with the last director of the company, but he did not know him and therefore would not cooperate. At that moment, an unknown person with bodyguards suddenly appeared. Xiao turned around but did not recognize the stranger. Realizing that he was here for a reason, Zhang was surprisingly polite with him and asked to sit down in his clearing. The businessman once again apologized for being late, saying that there were traffic jams on the roads. Guangsun immediately reported Luo that this man's name is Canlei and he is the owner of Wailei. Suddenly, Lei recognized in the teenager the new president of the company Luo Fan. Arrogant Honda said that they were discharges. In addition, one should not pay attention to them. Unexpectedly could not stand it, and said that he was a garbage, like his whole family. Space suggested that this is the end of their business relations and soon the corporation would bend. Fan said that this girl is completely unknown and must be punished, in connection with which Chanley ordered his guard to teach her a lesson and teach her manners. The frightened Qi instantly backed back, realizing that she shaved the excess. The bodyguard of Lei, meanwhile, had already swung, intending to hit the girl. Luo, in turn, closed her eyes and prepared to get for her fair statement. However, the main character did not allow him to do this and grabbed his hand. At the same time, the young master noticed that she was his employee, and he would not allow her to harm. Then he fixed his formidable look at the heads of corporations, realizing what consequences could be. All those present were shocked by such a bold behavior and a statement by Luo. Fan noticed that Xiao is a nameless Pahoshka Chu. In this game risks breaking, rising so high. In addition, a few more inaccurate movements and he will be convinced of this personally. The young cultivator said that in this case he would take a couple more people with him and they will all break together. Chanley said that the young are excessively arrogant because they do not know the truth of the price of life. The guy also hinted to him that a huge number of people died right in front of him. Speaking in this way, Fan was dumbfounded by such a statement and with great difficulty kept himself in his hands. Instead, Honda could not stand it, who hit the table and stated that his behavior was unacceptable. Then he completely drove them off the golf site, saying that Luo here is not happy here. At that moment, Sui, as always, tried to smooth out the corners and began to ask for forgiveness from them, by stating that they should not take everything to heart and they admit their guilt. But Xiao said that Guan did not understand, because Zhang initially wanted to humiliate them in the presence of Chani. At the same time, he was not going to extend the contract with them, and that is why he arranged a show. Qi, in turn, confirmed the words of her boss and said that this is true. Sui once again called on her not to intervene in the conversation. He also accused the president of that Luo intentionally creates a conflict. Suddenly, Honda suggested Guangsun to go to the corporation to Lei, where they would respect him. Fan approved the decision of his friend and noticed that he would become the vice president of his company. But Sun refused, because for him, Luofan is the second family, and he gave this company for many years. Xiao noticed that they were apparently interested in him to lose his face. Honda again ordered him to leave this location, threatening with physical reprisal. However, the young master said that he is not yet finished with them, would not go anywhere. Zhang repeated his position that he no longer needs the services of his company. Shui was shocked by such a sharp statement from Honda, but could not do anything. The main character was completely calm and naturally approaching their table. Then he reached for the teapot, in which their delicious tea was. Then, also at ease, he began to drink from him. Everyone was dumbfounded by such an act of Xiao. The young master at this time poured into a cup of tiled tea in a cup. The shocked Honda asked him what all this means and why he was doing this. The young cultivator understood that they would not drink tea after him, and he was counting on. Soon, Luo took a cup of tea and said that they were inappropriately behaving, and earlier he would send them to sick leave. Zhang asked him. Xiao blurred in a malicious grin and repeated what was said. At that moment, the young man crushed a cup of tea with his hand. Such a rich drink hit the clothes of Chanlai and Honda. They were in shock. The young president of the company, Fuke, said that they live in a legal state and it would not be so easy for him. Luo once again smiled and said that he was very mistaken. The dumbfounded Zhang asked what exactly he had in mind. The young man answered. He was not trying to intimidate them, adding that in fact he threatens them, and they may not sign the contract, but will not allow employees to insult. The perplexed Honda literally lost speech and did not know how to answer him. At that time, Xiao took a second cup of tea and invited him to play golf. Laughing, Zhang asked if he really wanted to play with him. Fan, in turn, asked his friend to show the young man a masterclass to satisfy his desire. But Luo said that if he wins, then Honda will sign a contract. If he loses, Fan will become his company. The shocked guy asked, "Is he really ready to put a multi-million-dollar corporation on a Kona?" Xiao answered positively. Then Zhang ordered his servant to record everything that was happening. Then the self-confident owner of Fuke even raised bets and said that they would order their products by 15 million. But only in the case of their loss, of course. Everyone began to dissuade him. However, Luo did not even think to retreat from his words, in connection with which Honda called on to begin the game. Chanlai also decided to put 5 million to the friend's victory, which he stated, but if Xiu loses, then he is obliged to kneel and ask for forgiveness from them. Once again, Qi could not stand it and began to violently defend her boss. But to their surprise, the young President Fan agreed to this condition. Then he again called on the arrogant Honda to start the game and not sit down. Zhang said that one who will drive 5 goals into the hole for fewer strokes. The guy immediately prepared to fulfill his first blow, which he stated. Naturally, the main character did not argue with him and kindly provided such an opportunity. After a moment, Honda inflicted a fairly good and accurate blow to the ball. As a result, the ball landed literally in 1 meter and 30 centimeters from the hole. He understood that he was really a professional in golf, and the director could only rely on luck. What was a staggering result, Canlai praised his friend. Of course, Guangsun understood that practice was important in golf, and the young president did not have it. After that, arrogant Zhang called on the young cultivator to demonstrate his skills. Artificial intelligence told the owner that until the Xiao will pay off the debt, he will not be able to exchange abilities. But Luo knew what he was doing and asked to put all 5 goals at once, because he did not want to waste time in vain. Then, the teenager prepared for a responsible blow, trying to stabilize his breathing. Qi, in turn, asked Zuyo whether their boss would cope with this task. But Guan was skeptical about his account. But in fact, Xiao mastered the technique of Izinzin and was familiar with the control of space. At that moment, his club was unexpectedly ignited by fire. Luo was concentrated as much as possible. After a couple of moments, the teenager inflicted his powerful blow to the ball. The fiery ball flew to the side of the hole. Everyone was holding his breath, believing that the failure of Xiao was inevitable. He literally began to pray for the president so that he won with such an arrogant Honda. After a few seconds, the outcome struck all those present. Even Sui did not expect this. After all, the ball hit the hole straight. On the first attempt, Luo achieved an incredible result. Soon the young master sent and the other 4 goals towards the hole. It seemed that all the balls scattered along different trajectories. Guansun understood. This was the end. Zhang, in turn, prematurely began to rejoice at the loss of Xiao. However, he did not expect that in course all 5 goals would be in the hole. It was really amazing. Everyone was shocked by this outcome of the game. The servant instantly reported that all 5 balls were accurate exactly in a hole, after which the main character threw the club and invited Honda to continue the game. For several seconds, Zhang silently looked at the hole and could not understand how this could happen. Then he finally admitted his own defeat and sadly sat down on a deck chair. The angry Chanlai accused Luo of intentionally pretending to be inability to eventually mock them. The young master denied his statements and noted that 5 million of him. In addition, Honda is obliged to sign a new agreement with his company. Fan was furious. The young cultivator continued to provoke him, saying that it was only 5 million and he would still work. Chang said sadly that this year, he will not be able to place an order of lay, which meanwhile fiercely said to Xiao that all this would be doubly returned to him. The curious Honda asked the guy how he actually turned this. Luo replied that when he signed the contract, then he would tell him about everything. Soon, the contract was successfully signed and our satisfied heroes hurried into the car. The joyful Qi instantly ran to the young president with questions. The girl asked if he told Zhang the truth that he had trained every day for 10 years. Xiao, in turn, only smiled sweetly but did not answer the question posed, which naturally angered a young person, and she hurried towards the car. Suddenly, Guangsun asked Luo if he had heard about the Dragon Gang. The young man asked him a counter-question. Did Sui really decide to join their ranks? Of course, Song answered negatively, saying that this is the largest underground organization in Jiangchen. Then the teenager asked what exactly the vice president wanted to love. Guan said that Valet Corporation put pressure on their company and the former director had to sell it to Chu. Xiao was interested in what Sui was talking about and he called him to continue. Song noted that once Chan saved the leader of the Gang of the Moon and now they are in good relations. And when the former manager tried to sue Valet Corporation, he was asked at sea. And after that he sold fan boss Yunsun. He also had to leave the city. Luo felt a certain catch in his words and asked what Shu was driving at. Guanzhen opened his door to the car and asked him to make peace with Chanli, because they could not cope with the Dragon Group. Xiao asked how he offers to do this. Was it really to sign an unequal contract? At this moment, Qi, as always, intervened in the conversation and said that the police would definitely deal with this gang. An extremely tired teenager got into the car and called on to go back to the company. After some time, the main character reached the office of his corporation, where to the office of the young President G-Man brought some documents. Xiao asked what kind of paper it was. Li replied that this is information about Weilei's old partners in order to lure everyone to their side. The young cultivator approved the labors of the assistant and urged her to contact him if necessary. May noticed that his help would really be needed to agree with Zhang Yunchun from the Intune factory, which is a good partner of the fan. Luo hastened to get acquainted with his dossier. Xiao found out that the director Jian was not at all interested in women and was idle. After that, the guy gave the QE documents and said that tomorrow they would go to meet him. Encouraged by recent events, Luo asked boss if he knew how to agree with him. Naturally, the young director answered positively and broke into a sweet smile. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the NSA, the assistant came with new information to the head of the department. The assistant said that the past intervention was committed from Jiangchen. The boss ordered the agent to secretly send for special contact in order to lure him into their organization. At this time, the young master was at home and studied traditional Chinese medicine. As always, Izenzine helped him, because in just one night, Luo was well aware of this industry. The guy decided to find out how this is possible. Yunchun loved to drink and tobacco, but at the same time did not pay attention to women. The next day, they, along with inquisitive Qi, went to the Intune factory. The girl noted that the boss became a celebrity and Jean could not refuse to meet. But Luo said that most likely he simply had no other options. Then he urged her not to pester with questions and see what Chun was doing. Entering the factory, the president's personal assistant led them to the office of the chief. Yin kindly invited them to his office, and our heroes went into the room. Yunchun sat in his chair and blurred in some kind of non-natural smile. However, the old man instantly accused the young man of vile tricks, because the order of the head of Zhang was cancelled. She said that he should not be so hostile to them, because they came to discuss one important matter. Then Luo handed him some documents and said that he was spending 500,000 on waylay. He will cost 450. After all, being the head of the factory, Jian is obliged to think about profiles for his company. The fat man, negatively tuned to the conversation, took to familiarize the paper. But after a moment, he threw them into the face of Xiao and said that he recognized only Wile. The guy politely asked him to calm down, because only 3 days ago he suddenly lost consciousness. The dumbfounded Yunchun said that the teenager had no right to follow him. The main character noted that he was slowly dying of a serious illness, and after a couple of days he would faint again. At the same time, he does not know at all what kind of illness it was. The old man, in turn, thought about it, adding that it is better for him to raise a contract from the floor and sign it, because he will not accept it dirty. After that, the young President Fan left the premises. Jian began to seriously think. After some time, he came to the conclusion that it was better to maintain the contract just in case. A few days later, Junchen came with a contract to their office, which Ku reported. But Luo had already raised the amount to 1 million. Guanxin was furious, believing that Jian would never sign an agreement on such absurd conditions. After a couple of minutes, the grateful Chun left the office of Luo and thanked him for the service rendered. In the end result, they stopped at 5 million. Qi and Sui were shocked by this outcome. At night of the same day, but Shan called his friend and said that he had caught a mole in his company. The teenager instantly rushed to the office and asked Zhang how to do it. According to him, the traitor was Dunhai, who was lying on the floor but said that he was working on a factory stove, and an ordinary worker would not have done it. The young man asked to untie him and give a chair. The director of the baking plant immediately stated that this was some kind of misunderstanding, and this person almost killed him. Xiao leaned toward him and asked if he could testify against Chanlai in court. The dumbfounded Dong replied that behind him there was a gang of a dragon, and besides the lunas of his friend, therefore there can be no question of this. Then Luo said that he would ensure security to him and his family. In response, the old man only laughed. Without thinking twice, the guy asked Zhang to bring here his wife with children and at the same time a young mistress, and only then did Dunhai realize and agreed to testify against Chanli. What was a satisfactory answer for the young president of the company? Xiao also urged Shan to take several people for a court session, and he will act behind him. The next day, reporters were already under the court building and broadcast a public hearing on the lawsuit Fan against Chan. The main character called on Zhang naturally, saying that he will certainly help him. The young president himself watched what was happening from the cafe and hoped that today it would end. Artificial intelligence reminded the young cultivator that if he pays for the debt, he will be able to acquire the necessary skill. At that moment, Qianlin approached Xiao. The guy did not expect to meet her. Ji Yu once again called on the teenager to cooperate with the police, assuring that this is for his good. Meanwhile, the hearing began, and the court called on the parties to supplement the information on the case. Chan's lawyer immediately stated that the plaintiff threatened his client, and the audio recording he provided is a fake. Shan asked to provide appropriate evidence about the forged record, Luo in the headphone and said that he holds well and should continue in the same spirit. Then the defender of the other side said that he had already provided an autopsy report, and the deceased really died of an overdose. Zhang, in turn, could not stand it and violently stated that he could put this report to himself much deeper. The court did not leave this expression without attention and called Shan to restraint. Xiao also asked his friend to calm down. Then he called for provoking a lawyer with the help of a fact about his wife, who left him to another. Zhang instantly asked for forgiveness from the court and promised to be more restrained in statements. At the same time, he recalled that after the autopsy, the court doctor suddenly resigned and left the city. In recent years, Jianbei has fabricated many false news, and his reports are not trustworthy. Chan's lawyer began to protest that at the moment the hearing is going on in a completely different case. But Shan said that everything he said was directly related to the matter and he simply covers the guilty. Naturally, the defender's defender denied everything and said that he was carrying complete nonsense. Chang continued to push Fu and say that he clearly has problems with the kidneys. An angry lawyer urged him to repeat what was said. Then Shan pressed to a sore spot. Having stated that his wife could go to another precisely because of his renal failure, the defender literally went crazy and began to express his obscenely to yes. The court immediately called the defender to calm, so as not to violate discipline. However, He continued to insult Zhang and, meanwhile, conduct an inadequate dialogue with the judge. Finally, the court could not stand it and ordered the lawyer to immediately withdraw from the premises. A moment later, Fu realized that he had done and began to apologize to the court. Satisfied, Xiao closed his laptop, realizing that the case remained behind the small and soon the Dragon Gang will cease its existence. Then he asked Lin whether her department was recruiting auxiliary police. At this time, in the city of Sayahai, in the house of the superstar Su Li, where it was, the girl was pre-acted by the mirror. applying light makeup to her charming face. Suddenly, little Bei ran to her and asked her about the young master. After all, she has not contacted him for a very long time and is worried about whether everything is fine with him. Sue assured her that everything was in order with him, and he just works a lot. At this moment, the assistant rushed them, as there can be traffic jams on the way to the airport. Lee put a hat on Bei and noticed that she had already asked about Luo several times, urging not to worry about him so much. After that, the girl went out onto the balcony and found then she and the girl are already waiting. Staying in a good mood, Sue took Bei in her arms and went to the airport, from where she had a departure to Jiangchen. Meanwhile, Xianlin sat on a bench to talk to her father, to whom she reminded that her sister Shui is returning today, and she needs to be taken from the station. However, the forever busy father said that Xiao herself would find her and had already sent her personal belongings. Lin was bewilderment and began to scream that she spent 10 years in the mountains and she should not be left alone. But Jiyu was not glued and stated that Zhu practiced martial arts and everything would be fine with her. Qian did not continue the conversation with him in such a tone, and hung up. The president of the NSA also boiled and put the phone, blurting out loud that it was always displeased. Then the embittered Lin decided to call the sister, but her phone was outside the network zone, from which Jiyu fell into a fury, realizing that something bad could happen to her. At this time, Xiao wandered at the railway stations of the Jiangchen station. The girl sincerely believed that soon a police officer would become as her sister. Then she turned the card to understand how to get to the district bureau Guanmin. Having twisted the card a little, Sui did not understand where to go, but did not lose hope. The young cultivator, in turn, went to the Jiangchen Police Department. Luo hoped that when he became an auxiliary police officer, he would finally deal with the Dragon Gang. After a couple of seconds, the main character rang the phone, and he hurried to answer. It was Yunxun. The young master asked why he was calling and whether nothing happened. Chu asked a counterclaim whether Xiao would make him a company in the evening to have dinner. The guy understood that he could not refuse, but what boss wanted to talk about Luo did not know. Thus he agreed, and Shun made an appointment for 9 in the evening. At 8:30 in the evening, the young cultivator went to the pavilion of Chunhan, where Lan met him and kindly asked to go to the table to Mr. Chu. The main character went into the room and Yunxun immediately called him to his table. After all, since the young president went against Zhang, he needed to convince Sankuya not to touch Xiao. The teenager sat down at the table and asked what happened and why he called him at such a time. Without explaining anything, Sun poured tea to a young man and asked him to relax, enjoying a magic drink. After that, Luo asked if he knew about the existence of a dragon group, adding that they are engaged in the illegal business, and their enemies usually do not live for a long time. Xiao asked if Chu was really in the gang and earnings in them with a lobbyist. The old man laughed and noticed that Sankuai would never have allowed this. Then he said that Luo needs to be revealed with him to avoid unnecessary problems. After all, now he is beyond his power. But when the guy becomes stronger and more influential, he will be able to destroy him. Xiao understood that before joining the police, he needed to protect his family. Finally, the teenager agreed to the terms of the boss, which he informed him. Yunxun was pleased. At the same time, Sun said that at a young age the main patience and he should not forget about it. Suddenly, the old man asked if Luo wanted to marry his daughter. The guy refused, saying that his career, first of all. After a certain time, the moon came to the restaurant and apologized for being late, kumed him as a close relative and ordered Zuo to be immediately served. As a result, he sat down at the table and immediately paid attention to the young man. Dissatisfied, Sankuai asked why this insolent sits at the same table with them, adding that he, unfortunately, cannot deal with him in such a place and under Yuna. After that, Lun called the waitress and suddenly ordered 3 bottles of vodka. Intending to humiliate the teenager, the smiling Chu asked what Sanya conceived. Kui's expression changed dramatically, and Lun said that Jun wanted him to recognize the malts with his own. Then he will have to drink 2 bottles of one after another. At the time, a grave silence hung in the hall. Suddenly, the guy got up and said that he agreed to pass this test. Then he opened 2 bottles of vodka and looked at the moon with a menacing look. A moment later, the teenager knocked over 2 bottles at the same time and began to drink vodka. At that moment, the distraught Sanya broke the 3rd bottle on the head of Xiao. Kui was shocked by such a result because he used a huge amount of internal power, but Luo got off only a wound on his head. Lun wiped his hands and said, "This is because he offended his younger brother, and the other 2 bottles of him as an apology. In fact, due to the constant coverage of internal power from Isenjin, the guy was able to withstand the blow. Washing up with blood, The protagonist asked the head of the dragon gang whether he was pleased. Sankui understood that he alone could not cope with the mals, which means that it was necessary to resort to another option. The young master suddenly thanked the moon for hospitality and hurried to the exit. Having stated that he is enough for today, especially since he still has urgent matters, Chu, in turn, asked his friend not to touch Xiao anymore. Kui promised not to do this. Soon their meeting came to an end, and Lun also went to his car. In the car, he told his people that tomorrow they would be excluded from the group. The dumbfounded Dawan asked what they were guilty of him, that he wants to drive them out. Lan Bao was disturbed by the fact that boss Sanya was too respectful about Chu. Lun, in turn, ordered them to immediately eliminate Luo and the ET of Traces. And the rest is not their mind. The guys immediately fell silent and went on the road. The young president, meanwhile, returned home and bandaged the wound on his head, not understanding why Kuai wants to kill him. A few minutes later, he received the next call from Qianlin. Gui reported that tomorrow a girl will come to him, whom he had saved not so long ago. Xiao was pleased to realize that she found her parents and she finally was fine. The next morning, the teenager came to the teenager as always dissatisfied Lin and knocked on the door, saying that they had come to him. The young man went on the threshold and said that he was not her prisoner. At that moment, the little Bei rushed into the arms of her savior and said that she brought her aunt. Li, in turn, was greeted by Xiao, who noticed that the girl had already grown up. Then Luo also greeted the star Su, recalling recent events. Suddenly, the girl asked the assistant T to take a walk with Bei and Gua on the street, as she needed to talk to the guy. Young ladies instantly went to the fresh air to play with the girl. In fact, Zhao and Li recognized each other and no longer hid it. The superstar in turn stated, since he saved the child and something special happened, he is now her young man. Luo blushed at the moment and said that that night everything was spontaneously. Suddenly, Su gave him her address in Shanghai and invited him to visit her. Leaving, she said that if he does not see the point in this, she could not come. The main character was shocked by such a sudden meeting and even lit a cigarette. At the same time, the young president wondered whether he could choose one of the only one among all the girls and become a support for her. Indeed, in connection with the recent events with Sun, he could be called an unlucky person. Xiao decided to call Shanu and ask him to take a car from him. A friend naturally lent his car to him. Yes, he said that the keys are weighing on the hanger, and the car was parked near his house, while he asked not to scratch the transport. Luo immediately went to the car and crouched into it, sighed with an invoice. By that time, the teenager was already following Sankuya, who informed him of the departure of Xiao. Lan Bao also attached the locator to the guy's car and asked to track his location. Then he paid an unknown person to hold his mouth on the castle. At that moment, Yuan approached him and slightly hit his head. The frightened old man turned around. Yes, once again, he called him not to loosen about what had happened in order to stay alive. Then taking the wrench, thugging in a couple of seconds, twisted it and showed the old man, thus making it clear that the same thing will happen to him if he nevertheless talks. Soon, they got into a huge truck to go after the goal. The stupid Yuan asked Lan what they would do next. Bao started the car and said that now they will track the malts and finally finish off. By the beacon, one could understand that Xiao rode along the embankment towards the port. Meanwhile, Luo thought that he would soon be able to return a debt of 600 million cho, and after that he will become a police officer in an auxiliary detachment and get rid of the dragon gang. Lan Bao, and at that time drove after the young men, and Bao called on the Yuan to use his inner strength. A moment later, they got closer to the goal as much as possible and prepared to attack. The speed of the truck suddenly increased, not without the help of Cultivator's abilities. At that moment, the truck sharply overtook the Luo car and turned in his direction. Zhu continued to think about Su and how strange he feels next to her. Everything happened too fast. The teenager did not have time to turn the car and crashed at speed into a truck. Thus, the front part of the car was literally torn. The Xiao himself flew out of the car. It seemed that nothing would save the young master. His condition was extremely deplorable. Lan immediately ordered the healthy man to kill the young man. Yuan headed towards the guy, thunder, and stood over the main character and said that he had to live a couple of seconds. After which, Yuan rushed to the young cultivator and hurried to deliver the last blow. However, the young master managed to grab his hand and apply his skills, with the help of which he managed to dodge the attack. Yes, the thug was shocked by the skills of Luo. Then Xiao held a lightning series of painful strokes to the near Yuan. Meanwhile, in the second hand, the teenager concentrated most of the internal energy. As a result, he attacked Verzel and struck his body, which was a deadly blow for him. Thus, The bloodied and instantly collapsed onto the asphalt, not showing signs of life. Luo, in turn, smiled and began to provoke Lanbi in every way, which was simply dumbfounded by such an incredible force of Xiao. But the order of the moon had to be fulfilled. Then he took out his knife and said that the guy could not resist him. A moment later, Bei rushed towards Luo. The master again began to concentrate energy in his hand. However, the cultivator threw a dagger at him and ran to a bloodied friend. The young man managed to dodge, and the knife landed in a man who decided to help as he saw an accident on the road. Len at that time dragged the wounded body of Daejeon towards his truck. Bao did not know whether he could help him, but it was impossible to leave traces. People immediately ran out of cars to find out if the survivors of the accident. Artificial intelligence strongly recommended that the owner cure 10,000. However, Xiao asked him to cure only his legs so that he could rise independently. At that moment, one of the passing by running out of the car and found Luo. The guy, in turn, instantly informed the salvation service of what happened. The young man was again in the hospital. The stranger volunteered to help him and brought a little food, since at the moment there was none of the close ones. Suddenly, someone knocked on them in the ward. Xiao did not know who it could be. Suddenly, a police officer arbitrarily opened the door and entered the room. He stated that he would like to talk to his son about the incident. The dumbfounded guy put a plate with food on a chest and indignantly moved towards a law enforcement officer. Having stated that he is actually not his father and he was only 22 years old. A few days later, the main character went to the Guanmen Police Bureau. At the same time, the young master called Shanu and called him to be extremely careful and for some time to carry out the business of the company. Zhang in response asked the young cultivator not to bother and convinced that everything would be fine. She said that he himself knows this, but security is above all. After which Luo decided to call his sister. The girl was glad to hear him. After asking why he suddenly decided to call her, the guy urged her to seriously treat his request. The teenager asked Ju less to go outside, and if she needs something, it is better to ask for help from Yes. Perplexed and asked what this time happened and what such a request for, the brother hastened to reassure her and said that everything would be fired soon, but she needed to be careful. Then the teenager suddenly hung up. The girl seemed extremely strange. At this time, Xiao had already submitted an application to the auxiliary detachment of the police, and he was asked to go to the backyard. After a couple of seconds, a guy who helped Luo ran to them during an accident and also decided to apply. The police officer noticed that the set was up to 25 years, and it was necessary to come earlier. An extremely indignant young man said that he was only 22 years old, after which he threw his passport on the policeman table. Xiao did not expect to meet his savior here and thought that it would be interesting to observe this. A couple of minutes later, the policeman asked everyone to go to the shooting range for him. The stranger at that moment saw in the crowd of Luo and said that he recovered quite quickly. The young master said that he was able to quickly get to his feet only thanks to the family kung fu. The teenager was shocked by such an incredible result and even began to envy him. A few minutes later, they all came to the training ground where their coach came out to them. His name was Yan, and he began to tell the arrived cadets the local rules. Then a cross took place 30 circles around the landfill. Van wanted them to warm up before training. All as one began to run under the scorching sun, but no one thought to retreat. Having noticed a young girl, the guy reported this Xiao, but there was no reaction from him. Luo did not know who she was, but in fact it was the sister of the bastard Shanlin. Suddenly, the young man said that at the moment he was not interested in girls. What literally shocked the stranger's shock, he did not understand how not to be interested in them. Xiao thought only about one thing in order to recover as soon as possible in the auxiliary police detachment. After that, once and for all to end the notorious group of the Dragon, which, like a disease, captured an entire city and no one could fight back. A few days later, the main character agreed to meet with Tego, but he was not there. At that moment, the young master saw 2 fire engines. He became curious. After all, fire trucks were heading towards the Kun district. The guy climbed to the roof, where he found a fire in one of the multi-story buildings. While he saw a certain brawl below, the unknown young lady ran away from armed bandits and ran into the lane. Suddenly finding herself in a hopeless situation, she realized, this is the end. In this connection, the girl said that she would pay them as much as they wish. However, the thugs did not need money. Something else cared for them, and they began to tear their clothes from it. One of them said that she should take some pills so that everything goes well. At that moment, Xiao threw a cigarette butt, who hit right into Verzil's hand, who attacked the girl. Liu also passed by them. The guy was shocked by what was happening and could not ignore, especially mockery of bandits in relation to a poor girl. After all, recently, he has become a guardian of the law and wanted to restore justice in the city. As a result, Togo instantly called Luo and talked about what had happened. The perplexing bandits thought that the guy did not have everything with his head. Liu, in turn, urged them to answer for their atrocities and approach him. The crowd thug immediately rushed to him to demonstrate his skills. But Togo was able to surprise the thugs, showing what he was capable of, although it sometimes looked ridiculous. In the end, the young man was able to inflict considerable damage to one of them and began to act more confidently. Suddenly, on the other hand, he was attacked by another thug and grabbed his hand. Luo heard that a friend needed help and began to go down to them in the lane. With only a movement, Zhao disarmed 2 bandits. The rest naturally noticed him, calling him to leave immediately, or he may not live until tomorrow. Of course, this did not work on a self-confident young master. Besides, he found out that they were from a dragon gang. In this connection, the teenager began to demonstrate his skills in martial art, one by one. By ascending to a horizontal position, the discharges began to understand that it was not so simple. But at the same time, they were not going to give up, and continued to attack him with the help of cold weapons, which also did not help them in confrontation with a powerful cultivator. They stated that the dragon's group will never forgive him, and did not stay long for him. Suddenly, Xiao grabbed one of the thugs beaten by him and called for remembering his face. A tearful girl immediately began to thank her so young savior. At this moment, the system accrued a considerable number of points for the act of the owner. Unexpectedly, Luo took off his jacket. Then he asked the young lady to hide in them. The girl again thanked him for his help. Then the guy called on Togo quickly to leave the scene, but Liu decided to mock the bandits. He began to photograph their beaten faces and said that everyone would like it. Also, a friend of Xiao said that he had found something special in the Hun area, but Luo called him to discuss this in a deserted place. At that moment, the girl threw the savior's jacket over herself and chased after him. The protagonist asked what she needed and why she got behind them. The young lady called Jin Li. The girl, in turn, was extremely pitying to ask for them in the company. The young master urged her to go home as they simply restored justice. However, the young lady said that in fact she had neither a family nor at home. Her parents died early, and she came to Jianshan with her boyfriend to get a job. But he was addicted to gambling and as a result lost all their savings, after which he sold it to the Dragon Gang for 2 weeks. And terrible members of the group forced her to drink with clients in the Kun area and beat her. Jin could not tolerate such humiliations and staged a fire in one of the gang headquarters. But chaos began, and she managed to escape. The dumbfounded Tago asked, "Was it really that she had a fire in a high-rise building?" The girl answered positively and once again asked to take her to her. The amorous Li instantly approached her and said that he would do everything possible to help her. But the young cultivator urged him to come to his senses and not to do hasty actions. Then he nevertheless agreed to shelter the stranger and said that he would try to help her. Finally, having come home, Togo said that the Guanmin area was several headquarters of the Dragon Gang, and Hun serves for them the main source of income, and they turn all dirty things there. Xiao suggested that or could know about some frauds of the group, and it needs to be asked about it. At that moment, Jin left the bathroom and thanked that Luo gave her the opportunity to wash. The teenager noticed that while she was like his sister's clothes, and tomorrow he would bring her a new one. The girl said that he should not worry so much about her and everything is fine. Artificial intelligence began to tell the owner that he made the right choice, that he let this beauty into his house. Zhao, on the other hand, asked Li what substance the thugs from the group gave her in the lane, but Jin claimed that she had no idea about this, because she was immediately sent to the Hong area, and when she woke up, she began to severely beat her, and even poured something. At the same time, among the gang members, there was often talk about prohibited substances. They gave the girls some pills so that it was easier to manage them. Luo apologized that she had to recall this horror again. Jin sighed sadly and said that it was bad, because this nightmare would still remain with her for life. Also, a young lady told him about all the terrifying things that happened to her in Huna. Every day she wanted to commit suicide, but she kept her last strength. At that moment, Li burst into tears again and asked such a strong young man to kill them all. The guy immediately began to calm her down and promised to fulfill her request. After all, he himself had long intended to destroy this damned dragon gang. Suddenly, Tigo said that in fact, Xiao also suffered from this group. The main character noted that this is true, but he does not want to talk about it. In addition, this is a long story, but Liu and Li asked him to tell about what happened. The young president said that one day, by mistake, he helped some people and thereby crossed the road to this gang. But he did not know this. Initially, their goal was only he, but after everything turned upside down. Subsequently, what they harm his girlfriend, the consequences were terrible. The girl barely survived and at the same time lost her memory. At the moment, she never remembered him. And that is why the young cultivator intends to eliminate the dragon group, whatever it costs him. Jin confidently stated that she would definitely support him in this difficult matter. Tigo also promised to do everything possible for this and help his friend. At that moment, the girl suddenly clouded his mind and she felt uneasy. Her coordination of movements markedly gave a failure, and her head was very dizzy. Zhao, in turn, helped to sit on her sofa and asked what happened. Li replied that most likely she flew into the bathroom and she had a slight dizziness. Luo invited her to relax a bit, and then stayed in the newspaper. The young lady was grateful to the teenager. As a result, the girl wished everyone good night and went to lie down on the bed. Suddenly, artificial intelligence appeared and stated that he had a conversation to the owner. The system assistant said that after close contact with Jin, he realized what problems she had. Xiao noticed that it was not difficult to guess about this, since she only recently escaped from the Hun region and she was pumped up with prohibited substances. The next day, Li kindly brought a cup of tea to the guy to the room. The young lady put the mug on the table, and once again she led to the side. The girl was again dizzy and Jin almost lost consciousness. Luo noticed this in a timely manner and arrived in time for help, grabbing her by the waist. Li thanked her savior. The teenager in response only smiled sweetly. At that moment, the door opened Togo and greeted the girl with his friend. A rather curious picture appeared in front of him, and Liu misunderstood everything, in connection with which he said that he would wait for them outside and hasten to close the door from the back. Naturally, Xiao began to explain Jin that Togo simply joked and did not mean anything bad. An excited girl noted that Liu really did not think about that. The young man urged her not to worry about it and asked to relax, saying that he would do everything now. This time, Jin understood everything incorrectly and thought that they were familiar with only a couple of days. Then she suddenly said that she was actually ready and agreed to do it. The perplexed Xiao asked what she was talking about and what she was ready for. Then he began to measure her pulse. The girl blushed and fell silent at the moment. After a couple of seconds, she nevertheless said that he would not pay attention to her and continue to measure the pulse. However, the teenager noticed that the pulse Li is quite suspicious. This caused some suspicions. Luo, in turn, began to analyze what is happening to her and in what condition she is. The pulse of Jin was frequent, and the veins were expanded. It also had problems with blood flow. At the same time, I periodically experienced heat due to an excess of yang energy. But outside the cold was felt from yin energy. Xiao decided that this was the effect of the drug that stimulates the body. The system assistant again suddenly appeared and said that his diagnosis is true. In this connection, the protagonist asked him to see if her substances remained in her body. But the software assistant said that these substances have already disappeared into it. At the same time, neurons in the brain were damaged and she needed the next dose of this drug. Otherwise, this will cause dizziness again. In this way, it was possible to conclude it has a dependence. Then the young master realized that the bandits deliberately pumped up her substance so that she would not escape from them. Thus, thugs from the dragon group controlled girls using prohibited substances. The young cultivator asked artificial intelligence whether it was possible to cure it. The system assistant showed the book and said that if he pays 2,000 points, he will heal the girl with the help of this treatise. Luo instantly grabbed a book from his hands and said that he was buying it. A moment later, a flaming needle appeared in his hand. The guy began to act. As a result, Xiao began to chop the needle to various points on the body of Jin. She was extremely unpleasant, but it was necessary to endure it to finally get rid of the breaking. Her body shook and once again enveloped the heat. Li closed her eyes, trying to fight the disease. Suddenly, the young lady said that she was very hot. Luo continued to pierce points. The software assistant noticed that it was necessary to chop into the renal channel to allow the blood to flow down and facilitate the effect of drugs. Finally, Xiao began to pierce the girl's leg, and the procedure was successfully completed. It seemed that the girl was unconscious. The teenager was waiting for the result after acupuncture. Artificial intelligence said that the guy did everything right, and soon it would become easier for her. Luo also mentally called on to hold on, as there was little left. A certain time Jin slept and accordingly did not recover. The system assistant was looking forward to when she woke up to make sure that they did everything right. But Xiao unexpectedly wanted to change the appearance of the old man, about which he asked him. An extremely displeased program assistant replied that the owner can use the system store. Luo immediately went in search of a suitable skin for his assistant. The first option was not very beautiful, and the guy did not want a Pikachu system. The dog also did not cause a storm of emotions in him, and the teenager began to look for further appearance for the program. But the next skin of Panda was even more disgusting than the rest, and Xiao thought, at the same time, the function of the random external image of the system was too expensive. Thus, Luo chose a dog. Although he was not eager to constantly see a dog in front of him, artificial intelligence was dissatisfied with this option and urged the owner to change the image. Xiao smiled and said that he did not want to spend points on some skins. Then he went to the corridor to Togo, who immediately asked why they finished so quickly. Then he smiled maliciously and invited a friend to show a couple of effective techniques. The indignant Luo said that he was just trying to cure her from addiction. Soon, they finally went into the room and Xiao said that this substance is extremely dangerous. Suddenly, Liu remembered when he went on the instructions of Luo to the headquarters in the Kun area. The next night, the truck arrived. It became extremely curious for him what was happening there. Tigo saw how people in chemical defense costumes unloaded some boxes. At that moment, one of the test tubes fell to the ground and crashed, but they did not notice it. And Liu waited when they finished and carefully raised a pill that fell out of the test tube. The guy carefully took out this capsule with a handkerchief and asked his friend if it was interesting for him to know what it was. The main character took a pill and suggested that it was such a drug that is now poisoning the body Li. Then the young master asked the system assistant to scan the pill for the ingredients. However, the software assistant said that only human bodies could scan. The next day, the young cultivator went to the hospital to visit Yu. He also asked his sister to find out more about the pill. Xiao went into the ward to a girl who never came to his senses. Luo quietly laid flowers on a chest of drawers. Then he said that he would definitely take revenge on them to all, because Sun does not deserve such a life. Leaving the ward, the teenager stumbled upon the dissatisfied Ju and stated that she was almost killed. Because she asked a colleague in the laboratory to check the tablet and almost informed the head physician to her, Xiao, on the other hand, began to read the results of the analysis and was shocked by its contents. Zoe said that this drug is prohibited to spread and special control is underway. This forbidden drug caused dependence and gradually destroyed the neurons of the brain, which was quite dangerous. The sister urged her brother to stay away from these substances and in no case to consume. Luo assured her that he was not really engaged in such a thing and checked it for a friend. Soon, the young president said goodbye to his sister and went to the exit. He got into the car and began to think about how crazy Dragon's gang. A moment later, one idea came to him and Xiao hurried to bring it to life. He started a car and rushed away into the distance along the roads of Jianshan. The system was at a loss. In this connection, the dog asked the owner where he was going, because they should find out where the group has these prohibited substances from. However, the young man said that he knows what the next step needs to take. Then he talked about the grass of Mitsun, which was used as raw materials for pharmaceuticals. And in order to achieve such purity of the substance, you need professional equipment. The artisanal way will lead to the release of gas. Therefore, it is necessary to process mycin in a deserted place so as not to reveal the existence of the plant. The system assistant suddenly praised the owner for such knowledge. She continued to say that given all these conditions, he knows where the secret workshop is. This is the pharmaceutical Lunton in the southern suburbs. Luo was almost sure of this. For a certain time, the teenager rode to the factory and thought that soon everything would finally end. A few minutes later, the young man arrived at the place and began to look at the territory of the plant through binoculars. Thus, he found out that the thick gates are surrounded by high walls and the factory is full of guards. What says only one thing? Behind the gate is something very important for the Dragon Gang. At this moment, the guy discovered a huge truck of this group. It had a characteristic symbol on it. Xiao realized that there are substances inside. Naturally, curiosity prevailed, and Luo went downstairs to figure it out personally. There was a huge amount of security everywhere, but the teenager was able to quietly go through them. Xiao hid behind a large truck and ran towards the warehouse in which people demolished the boxes. Finally, being inside the hangar, Luo began to see what was in boxes. In order not to leave traces, he pulled on gloves and even threw a bathrobe on himself. But the main character did not find anything criminal, because the workshop was the production of ordinary drugs. The young master suggested that all this was used only to cover. Suddenly, the alarm worked and anxiety rose throughout the territory. The young cultivator realized what he needed right behind the door. At that moment, the guards entered the hangar. Xiao instantly hid behind the stairs. With them was an unknown girl who complained about wild cold and dirt. One of the representatives stated that this corresponds to the conditions for growing Mitsun grass. Then he handed her the key and wanted to launch production, but Chen called on Lee's not in a hurry with this. However, the guy assured her that he needed a batch of grass and as soon as possible. Catching herself, thought that this woman is truly insidious and knows how to cause trouble. The girl repeated her demands and headed towards the stairs, behind which Luo hid. Suddenly, a teenager came one obsessive idea. The system assistant urged him not to do this, but Xiao nevertheless came out from behind the shelter, pretending to be an employee of the warehouse. At the same time, the young man intended Chen, and the woman collapsed onto the dirty floor. The angry girl instantly began to insult the guy, saying that he would look where he was going. Luo turned on all his charm and gave her a hand so that she could stand on her feet. The woman naturally noticed such a handsome man and demanded that he immediately go to her office, where she began to heat up the situation, saying that one of her words and he flew out of the enterprise. Xiao decided to play along with her and said that he would do his best to make amends. Smiling maliciously, Chen came closer to him and asked if he was ready for everything. Luo answered positively. Then the woman said that today he would have to work out overtime. She liked that the young man succumbed and began to play by her rules, but it did not last long, because after a couple of seconds Xiao struck her neck. Chen immediately lost consciousness. It was impossible to waste time, and the teenager hastened to search for an extremely unpleasant person. A moment later, the young president opened a secret door using the key found. The guy climbed up the stairs and went inside another hangar. Everything was forced by Mitzengrass. Luo was shocked by such a scale. At the same time, modern equipment was used. Xiao understood that the Dragon Gang was determined. After going further, he fell into a certain laboratory where there were various test tubes, inside of which there was a highly concentrated extract from Mintzen grass. At that moment, a couple of guards suddenly found a teenager and headed for him. Luo sent them to horizontal positions with lightning movements. Then he saw the table of one of the laboratory assistants. He was literally strewn with pills with prohibited substances. Xiu understood that everything could not be left here in this form, which means that they need to be destroyed. Suddenly, the guy turned around and saw 3 carriers in front of him. They asked who he was. Luo, in turn, smiled and said that they got quickly enough. As a result, an alarm was once again sounded and anxiety rose. Along with this, Chen came to her senses, not understanding what had happened at all. The main character at that time called the police and asked when they arrived with help, adding that he found irrefutable evidence. In fact, the state university with his people was already on the way. The girl thanked the young master for cooperation and said that they would be soon. After a couple of minutes, an explosion thundered at the plant. Police officers went down from helicopters to London. The dumbfounded Chen saw what was happening and realized that it was necessary to leave. She hurried to get into her chic car and tried to hide, without even assuming that she is already under the sight of snipers. After a few seconds, one of the special forces shot in the car and it was brought aside. As a result, Chen drove into a nearby tree at great speed. It seemed that it was impossible to survive in such a situation. The police continued to arrive in considerable number. Thus, law enforcement officers detained absolutely all personnel. Wick said that it was necessary to start sending evidence and ordered everyone to get together. Then the Chow thanked. But the guy said that he did this exclusively for his own purposes. And if she really wants to thank him, then you need to inform the Sinland's newspaper so that they release a report. After that, the young president went in an unknown direction. The girl looked after him, realizing that, in fact, Xianlin was mistaken in his account and he is a really good person. Meanwhile, the leader of the Dragon Gang naturally reached rumors that Chen was dead, and the plant was covered by the police. Sanqui was dumbfounded by such news and gathered everyone in his office. Then he called to himself Zhixian, who was responsible for people from a pharmaceutical company. The angry head of the group asked how the police reached their plant. Fing rushed at his feet and began to say that he had no idea about what happened, adding that he did not have a single clue. Who could it be? Suddenly, the moon pressed his cane in his hand. Then he asked the same question again, but Ji said that, like him, he found out about all of the newspapers and news, in particular about the death of Chen, and it was impossible to establish her connection with the Dragon Group, and therefore no one would know about them. But Sonia demanded that he remove the entire top of a pharmaceutical company, since they do not need problems. The frightened Zhang, in turn, said that he would do everything in the near future. Kui noticed that the Dragon Gang is a single family and do not forget about it. But if something similar happens in the future, then Fan's fate will be waiting for all of them. Of course, all those present did not argue and nodded their head approvingly. Pressed Sanquai at that moment inflicted several strokes to Zhizhanyan with his cane. Feng constantly apologized to the leader of the Dragon Gang and assured that he really knew nothing. Lun said that he appreciates his support, but if he does not punish Jiang, then the rest will be unhappy. Zhai stuttering, he said that he was ready to bear such a necessary punishment. Suddenly, Kui asked him to sit down and calm down, because all this time he was well controlled by the Guanmin district. But at the same time, the company Lunton in a disadvantage and Heishui can refuse the next month from delivery. Suddenly, Feng stated that he knew how to prevent this and ensure timely delivery. The surprised lord with the dragon group asked what his plan was. Then Zhang said that the recipe for apple grasses was modified and the drugs of his niece Heishui, and it is called the Tail of Scorpio. And in the red zone, their laboratory still exists, and since they have a huge supply of apple grasses, they can start production at any time. And although the volume of Lunton is incomparable with the company, but this is enough to send the load, Lun praised his subordinate, saying that even in a critical situation he could think, and it pleases. Feng once again leaned in front of the boss and stated that he was not worthy of praise on his part. Suddenly, Senkui asked where his niece Black Scorpio is now. Kizian replied that she continues to investigate the death of her parents for a 10th year. Lun did not expect that the girl would be so stubborn and would not leave this venture. Feng smiled and said that Black Scorpio believes that no one knows about it, and she was acting secretly. But the red zone, left by her father, Sun Minghui, has long been under his control and supervision. In addition, the scene was extremely carefully processed and she will not be able to find anything. Sanya unexpectedly remembered the time when they and Sona founded the Dragon Gang. However, Minghui was against Kui took part in the illegal business. He was a solid in his decisions and principles, but he could not achieve greatness. Feng shook his hand to boss and said that the loon was the only courageous head of the group. In fact, it was Zizian who set up an ill-fated accident on the road, as a result of which, the parents of the Black Scorpio died suddenly. Sanya noticed that he then did not expect such a turn of events and was pleasantly surprised by Fan. After all, he helped him solve a very important issue about the leadership of the Dragon Gang. At the same time, keep the life of a little Heishui, because if they all died, relatives of the family would clearly suspect them in an adjusted accident. But everything turned out differently. And ultimately, Lun adopted her and allowed her to manage affairs on the surface in the red zone. And since Ji has been governing this territory for many years with the help of his wards, in fact, hey, outside the zone affairs, Jiang noted that he does all this only for the sake of his boss and helps in the development of the gang. But Sanya understood that once Feng betrayed Sona, it is possible that he would substitute him in the future. Meanwhile, Yu took the protagonist to the restaurant as gratitude. At the same time, the girl herself was not shy at the table and stated that this was all at her expense. Between the case, Xiaoxi began to be interested in prohibited drugs in Lunton. She was also curious as he found out about the whereabouts of the laboratory. Luo replied that he had his own sources of information, adding, "It is very good that she trusted him," and in the end they covered this bench. At that moment, the young master saw a charming person outside the window and looked at her. But he, first of all, was not interested in the appearance of the girl, but her strong internal energy. It was Heishui, she called Fan, and asked to look after the red zone, as she went with a friend on a trip. At this time, members of the Dragon Gang burst into the house of the young cultivator. Tao said that no one has the right to write various nasty things about the grouping. In this connection, the thugs began to destroy everything in the house, whether the frightened was sitting on the floor. As soon as she called her infidificent savior, she immediately grabbed her. However, at the same time, Jin managed to inform the young master about what happened. The bandits, in turn, began to beat and mock the poor girl in every way. Tao said that she did not have a chance to run away from them, and soon she would return to her direct duties. But he did not understand one thing: why the addiction did not manifest itself in Li. At that moment, Togo ran into the apartment and ordered them to stop atrocities, at the same time threatening with physical reproduction, which naturally only made fun of the thugs. One of the members of the Dragon Group said that it was this person who took Jin. Ji immediately rushed towards Lu, trying to have a psychological effect on him. But intimidation did not work on a brave teenager who began to resist the bandits. Subsequently, Tego began to apply his ridiculous blows, which once again made everyone laugh. Tao instantly calmed Lu and hit him in the face. The young man collapsed to the floor. Ji in turn believed that he was a kind of master of martial arts. But it turned out not so. After a couple of minutes, a young cultivator ran into the apartment and asked what they were doing. One of the gang members stated that this guy is really extremely dangerous. Then Tao switched to Xiao. and said that he would no longer write about their organization of stupidity. But Luo had a completely different opinion, which confidently stated him in response. Ji immediately held a lightning attack, but could not harm the teenager. At a certain moment, he grabbed his hand, which greatly surprised the Gloveres. Suddenly, the main character noted that his kung fu was not on top and he should have training more. Then Tao realized that he was a warrior of internal energy, as evidenced by his blue aura. However, even in such a situation, Ji was not going to retreat and stated that he had something to surprise him. Xiu smiled and called not to disappoint, because while his skills were clearly not enough for decent resistance, after that, Luo specially released Tao to give him the opportunity to prepare for the battle. Ji, in turn, took advantage of the technique of Silver Python, who flew out of his hand. But, as before, Xiao easily and naturally restrained his ridiculous attempts. The member of the dragon group was simply shocked by the incredible power of the malts. Upon learning of one of the special techniques of the guy, Tao asked how he managed to master her. Naturally, Luo was not going to answer his questions and continued to demonstrate his superiority. For a long time, Xiao brutally beat the arrogant he, realizing that he was not an equal to him. Then, the teenager said that in fact this article is only the beginning and they are waiting for a much worse outcome. He also intends to reveal the public all their crimes and destroy the Dragon Gang. After that, the cultivator urged him to take his people and leave the apartment. Soon, Luo calmly sat down at the table and talked with the system assistant about the nuances of internal energy. After all, a man with a scam possessed a special skill, but at the same time he was not too strong. The dog noted that this is due to its ability to change their muscles, and this ability is an earthly level. And at the moment, its level is equal to improvement, which was a pretty good result. But Xiao wanted more. The program assistant said that he needed to train more. After all, only in real battle can you improve and switch to the next stage of development. And if he really wants to destroy the Dragon Gang, practice needs to be started immediately. Meanwhile, Black Scorpio and Bao came to the grave of her parents. The guy bowed low to the monument and said that he and He Shui are doing well, and their daughter is now called the sister of Black Scorpio, and he is like her younger brother. From such statements, the girl came into rabies and expressed her indignation. The young lady herself vowed that she would certainly find the perpetrators in their death. Then he and Bao got into the car and the guy asked if she would really continue the investigation. Hey, answered positively. The young man also told her that he had failed, and now he would rely on her. But Shui did not see a special problem in this, because sooner or later San Kuai will come to her for help. At that moment, Bao rang the phone. It was Jizian, which was strange. Black Scorpio asked him to pick up the phone, but not to say that they were together. The guy answered the call and Feng ordered him to look after Lan Bao. Of course, the teenager agreed. At the same time, he ordered one of his wards to watch him. The next day, the members of the dragon group went on the road, discussing the fact that the head of San Kuai still trusted him and they should not let him down. Bao asked them not to lean out and not to create a noise so that they would not pay attention to. He himself was grief about the death of his friend Yuan. Besides, Xiao was really stronger. In this connection, hatred of Luo grew every day. Lan wanted to take revenge on him. Getting out of the car, the guy still could not calm down and constantly thought about revenge. Suddenly, he saw a young master in front of him who left the newspaper editorial building. Lan Bao tried to pretend as if he had not seen him and rushed in a different direction. However, the young cultivator saw him and said that he should not have come here. The accomplices of Bao instantly ran to his aid and ordered Luo not to touch their brother. The main character was as always confident in himself and prepared to teach them a lesson. Lan at this time finally overcome his fear and turned to the teenager, having stated that the last time he found him by surprise, but today he will pay for it. Bao's hand suddenly ignited with the help of internal energy, but this did not save him, because she read all his actions and understood what exactly to expect from him. Lan Bao, in turn, rushed towards Luo, trying to strike at the lower body. The gang members naturally supported the cultivator in his decision, but stood behind him. The young master waited absolutely calmly while Bao would get closer to him. But when he landed, he suddenly realized that he could not resist the young man and asked to let his younger brother go. Xiao was shocked by the fact that at the most crucial moment he changed his mind. Then he said that he would let him go, but he needs to answer some questions. Lan Bao immediately ordered his ward to wait for him in the car while he spoke with Luo. Zhao asked who actually sent him. The perplexed Bao asked a counter question. Did he really not know who had crossed the road? The guy grabbed him in the ear and called for an answer. Then the frightened Lei said that it was Fing. Since Jizian is responsible for affairs in the Red District, where Lunton was located, Luo also asked how much he knew about the drugs used by the Dragon Gang. At that moment, someone hid among the trees and hurried to take a picture, where it was clearly visible that instead of a showdown, Bao calmly spoke with the enemy. Understanding that Zhang was right and Lan should be eliminated for such a betrayal, after meeting with the main opponent of the group, the guy returned to the headquarters. Running into the room, he stated that their affairs were extremely bad and they should run away. Kizian, in turn, asked how things were with his task. After a moment, the teenager was seized by Feng's bodyguards. Bao realized that he had been declassified. In this connection, he began to strictly ask for forgiveness from the boss, saying that he misunderstood him. Zhang ordered him to tell everything that he knows about him. Lei answered. His name is Xiao Luo. At the same time, he is the president of Luo Fan, and for a long time offended by their gang, and once they sent them with Yuan to kill him. But the guy was too strong, adding that he really can't compare with him in combat skill. Ji smiled and said that very soon he would need his help. Lanbao immediately stated that he would do everything possible and, if necessary, will find more information about him. However, Feng said that everything was much simpler, after which he instructed him a gun. After a couple of seconds, Zhang shot Bao's head, with the words that he lent him his life. Then he ordered his people to inform the chapter that Lan failed the task and killed him. By that time, Black Scorpio met with his man who had investigated the accident. The girl, in turn, asked if there was something unusual in this matter. The guy replied that all the procedures are quite legal, but there are some nuances. Shui was wary of what he had in mind. The young man began to show her documents, where there was no photo from the scene, as well as the car participating in the accident. After all, after a traffic accident, the parties for some time shift the guilt at each other. A dream picked up a document and noticed that her parents had an accident on the 19th of April. And literally in a couple of days, everything was already signed and all the necessary procedures have been completed. The informant noticed, this is more like the fact that someone tried to hide all the facts. Suddenly, He Shui came on the phone that Lanbao was dead. At the same time, boss demanded that she immediately arrive at the headquarters. Shui was in shock. The dumbfounded dream came to Sanka the next day, who pretended to be painfully given the loss of Bao. The angry girl asked who did this because she wanted to take revenge. Lun continued to play a caring uncle and urged her to forget about it, because her father clearly would not want her to get into trouble. Black Scorpio literally went crazy and demanded that Kuei answer her who did it. Sonya said sadly that she should not be so hot-tempered and needs to calm down. Then he handed her a photograph of Xiao and said that he asked Lan to agree with him, but the consequences were terrible, adding that at the same time Bao was also hot-tempered and could say too much, provoking such events. Luo also possessed incredible martial arts skills and she should not do this matter. Naturally, he knew that his words would not work on her, and she would want to take revenge on the guy. In connection with which Hai Sui tore the photo of Xiao and stated that she knew how to deal with him. Soon the angry girl left to find the guilty as soon as possible. At that moment, Feng entered the head of the head. They began to discuss the genius of their unsurpassed plan and believed that it would end soon, indeed with such a character as a dream. In any case, she will find many problems. Zizian noted that thereby they would deal with both the main enemy and her. In addition, there are no evidence about the murder of Lanbao, which means that she will not guess anything. The next day, the main character came home with his friend, where a surprise was waiting for them. Hei was sitting on the couch and Jin hurried to inform them that this girl suffered at the hand of the Dragon Gang. She hardly managed to escape from the red zone, where they also mocked her. And when I was returning home, she found that the girl lost consciousness right in front of their door. Naturally, from such a touching story, the young master became sorry for her. Jin strictly begged her savior to help her and not quit in such a situation. However, the young cultivator seemed strange, although the story sounded extremely believable. Suddenly, Tego said that he was really sorry and he was ready to help her. Xiao urged him not to draw hasty conclusions and reflect on it well. But Liu said that he had finally made a decision, and it was not subject to discussion. Then Luo approached the alleged victim and asked what her name was. Shui called the name Jun. She herself already wanted to attack him and scratch his eyes for her brother. The system assistant was at a loss that his master simply agreed. Thus, He successfully portrayed the victim for several days. The young president needed to leave for business, and he decided to notify Joe about it. As a result, the young man approached the girl and reported his care. It seemed that nothing strange happened, but as soon as the door slammed behind him, the Black Scorpion looked at his workplace. Then she jumped sharply and rushed into the office of her main enemy. Hei Shui decided to see the documents on the computer to find out his secrets. A moment later, Luo suddenly returned and quietly went into the room. Seeing the Jun at his table, he asked what she was doing. The girl answered. Allegedly, Liu asked her to see some documents. Xiu smiled and said that there was a password on the computer and volunteered to help her with it. Black Scorpio answered him with the same cute smile and called for saying a password. The guy immediately brought her to the laptop and asked to remember the password so that there was no longer such a situation. At the same time, in a completely unexpected way, he began to touch her wrist bracelet. Then he completely grabbed the waist, as if looking for microphones and wiretap on it, but I didn't find anything. The girl, in turn, began to object to him. Her hand was instantly ignited by magical inner energy. At the same time, the Black Scorpio tried to control herself and asked the protagonist to do nothing rash. The young master asked her forgiveness, saying that she was too beautiful and he could not resist. What only once again confirmed her guesses that he was a womanizer. The system assistant asked when he managed to become so loving. In fact, the young cultivator wanted to measure her pulse because she claimed that she lived in the red zone. But he never found the same symptoms that Jin, which means does not have dependence. In addition, she had an instinctive emission of the true energy of Qi, and the bracelet on the wrist of the young person looked quite familiar. She could not remember where he saw him. Du was increasingly interested in the real personality. That same night, the Black Scorpio made her way to the company's office through the window. She had the poison of the tail of Scorpio in the test tube, which was an extremely dangerous substance. And even if you do not drink water where Hei poured poison, toxin will still fly in the air. But it was at that moment that Luo turned on the light in the office and went to his office. The smiling young man noticed that it was already so late, and she continues to help them at work. Shui, in turn, asked what he was doing in the company at such a late hour. The teenager urged not to leave her from the answer, because he was the first to ask her this question, after which Xiao began to tell her that there were no substances in her body. At the same time, she has true Qi, which means that she is not from the red district. Suddenly, the Black Scorpion attacked its worst enemy, saying that he had to die for a long time. Luo easily blocked all her attempts and grabbed the hand. The girl did not expect such a turn. Suddenly, Hei bounced to the side, demonstrating her abilities but never impressed Xiao. The shocked Shui finally realized that the guy was really stronger than her. The young master, in turn, grabbed her neck and urged her to work more diligent. Realizing that she could not defeat him, the girl began to strictly ask her to let her go. Luo at the same moment stepped back and stated that he would not touch Hei. The girl pretended not to understand what the young man was talking about, but Xiao continued to call her a real name and said that she was Sankuya's niece. At the same time, he was aware of her code name, Black Scorpio. Shui was in shock. Soon, the teenager presented her with a folder with certain documents and noticed that it would be useful for her to read it. The dream took the folder in her hands, trying to understand what this man actually conceived. As it turned out later, this was the same information that she had been looking for so long. With all the photos and reports, the girl was shocked by such a turn of events. Hei Shui did not know if he could believe him and whether all this was true, because he could fabricate all the evidence. Then the protagonist told about what actually happened to her parents. And as the driver guilty in the accident, the driver died the day after the incident, where the Dragon Gang car also lit up. And soon the investigator, who conducted this case, was found dead inside his house. The young master finally stated that Zizian was to blame for everything. It was he who tuned the accident. In fact, the Black Scorpio previously believed that Feng could be involved in the death of her parents, but he was faithful to her father. The young cultivator insisted that she take a closer look at Zhang's. At the same time, the teenager urged her to temporarily declare a truce between them. However, Hei Shui said that she would definitely return to him and take revenge. The perplexing Xiao could not understand why she had such a bad character. Shui immediately returned him a folder with irrefutable evidence and headed for the exit. But the young president threw her back on the folder and urged not to be so impulsive. The girl caught the documents and still hurried to leave this location. The system assistant asked his owner to tell her the whole truth so that she had no questions. But Luo said that these were her parents and she needed to figure it out herself. The Black Scorpio itself did not waste time and went to the Red District in order to finally find out the truth from Qizian. Having parked near the building, Shui got out of the car. Entering the office, Hei asked the guard where Feng was located. The employee replied that he was in his office. At the same moment, he called the boss and reported that a dream was heading for him. What made Jiang carefully reflect, because she had a special task, together with Xiao, but apparently something went wrong, or she completed the mission too quickly. After a couple of minutes, the doors swung open and Jui greeted Jui joyful. He immediately asked him the question of what actually happened to her parents on the day of the accident. Feng once again repeated that he had already shown her a report, but she would pour him for 10 years. Black Scorpio boiled at the moment and threw a folder into it with evidence of his guilt. Then she said menacingly that he took advantage of his connections and classified the murder into an accident. Then he closed the case and carefully figured out all its participants. Kizian, in turn, began to smile and threw back the folder with the documents to the side. After saying that it is better not to touch some things, the more many years have already passed. The angry Shui demanded that he finally admit a crime. Feng calmly leaned back in his chair and stated that since she was investigating everything, it was no longer any reason to hide it, and he really arranged an accident because of personal interests, despite the fact that her father considered him his confidant.